The Ghost Specialist. By Incarnated Wisp. Genre: fan fiction. Completed. Strategy. Action. Adventure. Chapter 141. When Sam reached the gym's field the next morning, Chuck was already in another gym battle. This time around, a trainer's Golbat was harassing his Machoke with air-based blades, and no matter how hard the Machoke tried to resist, it wasn't able to do anything about the flying type's attacks. Chuck tried to call for a rock throw, but shouting for that move caused his Pokémon to drop its guard. Though his Machoke grabbed a chunk of earth that could have knocked the Golbat out of the air, doing so opened it up to a blade of wind that slashed across its chest, and the Machoke fell back. From there, Sam sat and watched the rest of the exchange. The Machoke fainted, and the Golbat was able to take out one more Pokémon before ultimately falling to a Hitmonchan. The battle was eventually sealed by a Hypno, which, even though it became subjected to a taunt, could still unleash its psychic-type moves to finish off the last member of Chuck's team. The gym leader's laughter was explosive even in defeat. Chuck wasn't the kind of person to get upset with a loss as long as he enjoyed the match. Once his last Pokémon was returned, he handed his team's Pokeballs to an awaiting gym trainer for healing before moving up to his opponent and shaking their hand. "It's a matter of mindset," Sam whispered, speaking to his churning shadow while Chuck was too busy chatting with his latest challenger. "We're worried about taunt." "I'm worried about taunt." But to Chuck, taunt is just a tool. It's only a single answer he keeps prepared. It's useful, but it's also only one part of his strategy. We'll have the rest of the battle, too. Chuck was all about battles that were up close and personal. Lean into that, and taunt wouldn't be a big deal. It also had its counters, such as just about any move that messed with a Pokémon's move selection, which meant taunt countered taunt, funnily enough, but Sam was limited to what his team currently knew. A single night wasn't enough to teach his team new moves. So with what his team was currently capable of, he saw two big answers to the problem of taunt: either make sure it didn't hit, or outright ignore it whenever it was used. Taunt would only be an issue if he overplayed his hand and forced Chuck to use it to reshape the state of the fight. But since Sam was aware of that, he could use Chuck's preferences to his favor. Chuck wants simple fights? I'll give him simple fights. If we want to win, we just need to make sure we have a straightforward counter for taunt. After, he could rely on his Pokémon to handle the rest. Sam was ready for this. His plans favored him and his team. Sitting in the stands, he watched and waited, expecting Chuck to know he was there. His gut feeling was proven right when the previous trainer eventually left, and Chuck looked up at the stands to make eye contact with Sam. The challenge was clear enough. Their battle would be happening right then. Standing up, Sam left his seat to stride down from the field, taking advantage of this short break between scheduled matches for this short, one-on-one battle. Behind him, from above, a shout rang out, "Dreepa cheered!" Sam almost stumbled when he heard another, somewhat softer voice come right after. Though quiet, Drawcloak also sent Sam her own words of encouragement. "So, ready for our battle? I hope you'll push us just as much this time around." Chuck's shout was friendly, but it still reminded Sam of the outcome of his last two matches. He might have lost twice, but he still had the rest of his team. He also now had enough information to let him win. Pulling out a certain friend ball, Sam held it up and pointed it at Chuck to represent his acceptance of the challenge. "I'm ready," Sam said. "Ready to finally beat you and earn my badge." Chuck responded with a hearty laugh. The second Sam was in the trainer's box, Chuck didn't wait to toss his own Pokeball forward. As for Sam, he just clipped the friend ball back to his belt and gestured to the ground under the feet. As a flash of light overtook Chuck's side of the field, Sam's shadow stretched out to overtake the opposing side. From within that darkness, Miss Magius rose out of the floor, and Chuck's Pokémon Hitmonlee raised a knee while balancing on a coiled leg. "Spooky," Chuck commented. Subconsciously, his muscles flexed. Sam very purposefully ignored that physical reaction while the referee went over the rules, but he only half paid attention. He already knew how this battle would work, and he was going over the plan in his head. "Trainers," the referee shouted. "Are you ready?" "Ready," Sam yelled. Chuck roared to express the same. The very start of the match ended up being simple, where a Hitmonchan excelled in punches, a Hitmonlee excelled in its kicks. Miss Magius stayed in place as it charged forward, but rather than fully running up to her, it stopped yards away to lean to the side and extend its leg to unleash a powerful kick. Like a spring subjected to a tremendous force, the Hitmonlee's leg stretched out to threaten Miss Magius from even that far away. And, due to the foresight being maintained by a nearby Machoke, Hitmonlee's attack hit. Miss Magius did nothing to dodge and took that powerful strike to her side. But that just meant Phase 1 was already complete. Now! Sam shouted. Miss Magius brought up her arms, a hissing cackle leaving her throat even through the pain, and the opposing Hitmonlee suddenly lurched when its leg snapped back. Her use of pain split was in no way perfect, but she was at least able to divide the pain of that kick between her and her target. Honestly, the only reason she could use this incomplete move was thanks to her nasty plot, and preparing herself with it was why she didn't move at the beginning. There shouldn't have been any interaction between nasty plot and pain split, but yet, there was a hidden synergy between them. Nasty plot functioned by using dark-type energy to help make plans for the best ways to inflict pain, and what was pain split but a move that did exactly that? However, the only thing Miss Magius's in-progress pain split truly offered here was an opening. It barely healed her, and it barely drained Hitmonlee's health. But the surprise jolt of pain sent through Hitmonlee gave her the perfect amount of time to act, and she clapped her arms together before pulling them apart. Between her hands, motes of purple fire sparked up to hover in the air. Purposefully, the motes she conjured looked like they were from Will-O-Wisp. But they were not from Will-O-Wisp. To a fighting-type specialist, however, a Will-O-Wisp was trouble since a burn could outright cut a Pokémon's physical power in half. Chuck couldn't risk letting Miss Magius keep that up, and he called out the expected move. Taunt. Got you. Miss Magius fell for the taunt hook, line, and sinker, but Chuck fell for her trap at the same time. Though she would be using no further status moves, Miss Magius was already in the mindset of a Pokémon prepared for an attack. Also, the Hitmonlee was in the process of using taunt, which meant it was occupied by that move. She had complete freedom and plenty of willingness to send her hex forward, surprising both Chuck and his Pokémon. Hitmonlee tried to respond by showing off the sheer flexibility of its legs, bending its body a full 90-degree angle back, but that didn't matter. Miss Magius was suddenly right there. The flames of hex consumed the air above it, obscuring its vision, and then there was no more room between them. Already on the back foot, Hitmonlee didn't have the chance to respond. It used Detect for a flash of insight to avoid how the hex suddenly redirected itself to stab down, but that just meant it wasn't able to do the same to avoid her next attack. It was caught by her psychic. She squeezed. Consumed by a super effective, nasty plot boosted attack, Chuck's Pokémon fainted right there and then. Hey, Chuck said. Briefly, the gym leader rubbed his eyes. The small number of people watching from the seats clapped for the outcome of the match, and this time around, without a loss, the noise didn't eat at Sam. That was fast, Chuck said. Faster than I expected. You really came up with a strategy like that overnight. Sam realized he'd been staring at the field in silence and let out an embarrassed chuckle. He awkwardly rubbed the back of his head as Miss Magius shook herself to push away the effects of her nasty plot. Kind of. I had the pieces. Miss Magius had the rest. We were worried about your taunt, so we had to develop a bunch of strategies to get around it. I figured something simple was for the best and you probably won't fall for a quick rush more than once. Better to rely on this now instead of later. Extremely pleased, Chuck laughed. While going over strategies with his team, Sam hadn't known that Miss Magius could use Pain Split, but she had brought up the theory of its synergy with Nasty Plot. And after watching this match, he now fully realized just how fast she could move without Shadow Sneak unless Typhlosion or Drawcloak used agility. Miss Magius could beat any of them in a race. Sam hadn't even called for a Shadow Sneak here because he needed to give Miss Magius the chance to prepare other moves. While Miss Magius didn't have the same inbuilt aerodynamics as a Pokémon like Drawcloak, her speed was more of a consequence of what she was. She was a spiritual being adept at moving spiritual energies, which included the energies that made up herself, and she could also ignore air resistance thanks to her ghost-type ability to phase through obstacles. That meant she didn't need to worry about building up momentum. It also let her use moves quickly, allowing her to wholly focus on offense to end a match fast. Here, arguably, she had even been a bit slower than usual due to the foresight making her more physical, but she had moved as if she expected the Hitmonlee to react quicker. It was almost as if the way she had trained to fight saw her be naturally prepared for faster opponents, which was likely true thanks to all of her spars with Typhlosion. Or, maybe it was from her spars with someone else? For a brief second, Sam looked over to the stands, but Drawcloak didn't look back. She was too busy staring at Miss Magius, a complicated expression on her face. Sam couldn't tell if she was jealous or if she wanted to see how she matched up, herself. Next to her, Dreepa saw Sam's glance and waved. So, your next Pokémon. In a bit, Sam said. He wasn't fully paying attention again. He was already going over his next set of plans. I'll be waiting. Chuck shouted as Sam left the field. After, another battle passed. This time around, Sam didn't wait like yesterday, moving up to face Chuck for a second battle as soon as they were both ready. Previously, Sam led with Mismagius to set the expectation of a heavy offense. But here, he sent out a Pokémon that could have not fought more differently. Trevenant appeared on the field, ready to slowly wear down whatever Pokémon Chuck chose. Triple kick! Chuck yelled once the match started. For this battle, Chuck's Pokémon was a Hitmontop, another evolution of Tyrogue, but a Hitmontop was far more balanced than either of Tyrogue's other two evolutions. Weirdly, a Hitmontop primarily fought by spinning on its head, but that didn't mean it wasn't good at kicking and punching. In truth, the momentum brought on by its spins meant its moves could land with even greater power. So, spinning over the field to where Trevenant awaited it, Hitmontop struck him with a leg, then a tail, and then a second leg to his bark. The triple hit caused his body to crack as all three strikes perfectly targeted the same spot. However, the very moment the final kick hit, Trevenant lashed out to grab the offered limb. Horn Leech. A wooden hand latched around the Hitmontop's leg, claws digging into its flesh. Forced to stop spinning, it suddenly grimaced as it was drained of its energy. Though Trevenant started this match by dealing damage, Sam didn't plan for this battle to be as quick. It would be a slow, well-paced weathering of Trevenant's opponent until they pulled off a win. But Chuck recognized that quickly. He was a gym leader with plenty of experience. Instead of waiting to let Sam do as he pleased, he called for a taunt. Trevenant was already prepared. The second Trevenant heard Chuck's shout, he acted. Before Hitmontop could even think about using taunt, he was already gone. With Trevenant having suddenly disappeared, Hitmontop was let go, where it fell to the floor. This move was no protect, but Phantom Force allowed Trevenant to disappear for a few seconds. That meant he could temporarily remove himself from the match without needing to officially retreat from the battle. Phantom Force meant he wouldn't be around to be targeted, so a taunt here would always fail. Expecting his return, Hitmontop brought up its arms for a defense, and it was quick to turn around when Trevenant appeared out of a shadow behind it. It attempted to kick again, but Trevenant slashed. For this, his attack wasn't an attack. He simply took that kick to plant a leech seed on Hitmontop's chest. And just like that, the battle was sealed. Phantom Force simultaneously allowed him to stall while also letting him focus on attacks. Hitmontop was able to get a taunt off once it became more familiar with Trevenant's pattern, but at that point, it didn't matter. Phantom Force was an attack. It gave Trevenant a way to aggressively dodge while also stalling to allow Leech Seed to drain as much health as possible between moves. Given that the only other move Sam bothered to call for was Horn Leech, Hitmontop eventually dealt more damage overall, but Trevenant healed through all of that. Even when Chuck called for a series of powerful strikes that all landed, he was still able to use Harvest. It was an ability, not a move, and to save time, he could eat his fresh citrus berries whenever he was preparing his next attack while not present in the mundane conceptions of reality. Trevenant won. When Hitmontop collapsed to the floor, unable to stay standing after losing all of its energy, Sam felt confident. He felt satisfied. This was why he'd chosen to wait until another day. It was so easy to fall into the trap of a defeatist mindset, and it helped to know that even when given such a short amount of time, he was still capable of making effective plans. With this match finished, Sam was ready to move into his next, but Chuck just returned his Hitmontop and unexpectedly sat on his stone platform. Crossing his legs, he let his head fall onto a hand in rest, and then he looked Sam in the eye and beckoned for him to come over. Curious, Sam returned Trevenant and did exactly that. One night, and you've turned it around. One night, and you made a strategy to counter my entire team, didn't you? Chuck asked. I wanted to treat your challenge like a challenge in the conference, Sam explained. I started out thinking that meant I needed to prepare strategies in just a few minutes, but that's not how the conference works. Battles in the conference happen fast, but they're still usually only day to day. You don't get much time, but you still have at least some time to make a strategy, and you're also able to watch your opponent's battles or even watch recordings of them online. Which is what Sam had done here by sitting in the audience. When he finished explaining his thought process, Sam looked up to where Chuck was still seated. The gym leader glanced over him before quietly laughing to himself and lightly shaking his head. "That's not always going to work," Chuck said. "What do you mean?" Sam asked, suspicious. "All trainers you face will have a unique way they fight, and you can always try to find a counter to that, sure. But from my perspective, there are only two real strategies: a trainer either fights with a plan, or they fight with their instincts. So in your case, you're a planner. I'd expect pre-made strategies out of you. But for others like me, well, they're more instinctual." Sam frowned. He couldn't say he agreed with the idea of an instinctual fighter. He refused to believe that anyone was instinctually better at training Pokémon than someone else. Then again, Reedy was better at training Pokémon than me, but only at the start. We both put in a lot of work to excel where the other excelled. She's more specialized in the physical, but my Pokémon are now growing just fine on their own. Sam knew he and Reedy had both put in an insane amount of effort. At this point, he had personally spent hundreds of hours researching, memorizing, and understanding Pokémon through the use of the new Pokédex and other sources of info. He'd spent even longer just training with his team and discussing his ideas with them. Talking to his Pokémon about their capabilities was great at transferring theoretical knowledge into something more practical. But that wasn't what Chuck had meant. The gym leader looked at Sam and frowned, visibly sensing that Sam had taken the wrong meaning from what he'd said. "Trainers don't always need things like information, logic, or even strategy to win battles," Chuck said as he casually waved a hand. "Most trainers just do whatever feels right for their team at that moment. That's why I called them instinctual. They're not instinctually better. It's that they fight with their instincts rather than anything prepared beforehand." "I see," Sam said slowly. Chuck's expression was serious. "Sam," he said. "Do you know why I wanted to have this kind of modified challenge against your team?" "To push me and my Pokémon." Chuck replied with a light nod. He looked over Sam before speaking next. "You're mostly right. I still owe you training from what Brawly asked of me, and this is the best way I can provide that within the short amount of time we have." "But, Sam," Chuck pointed a finger at Sam's chest, "really, I did all of this to see how you would fight. I saw how you would fight when faced with an unknown team. I saw how you would fight when given just the barest amount of prep time. Honestly, I'm more than satisfied enough to give you your gym badge right now." He paused when he saw Sam frown. "But I'm not going to do that. That's not what we agreed on. See, if I can't help you pick up the basics, then I can at least help you understand something more advanced." Chuck leaned back to sit up straight. "Know this," he said, "the best trainers are the trainers that fight with both plans and instincts." "But you," Sam frowned. "You described yourself as an instinctual battler." "I did," Chuck said with a nod. "That's why Brawly has his own gym instead of staying here. He's already far surpassed me." From there, Chuck properly stood up to tower over Sam. His gaze shifted, he stared down with the full presence of a gym leader. "Samuel Greyson." Gym leader Chuck bellowed. "I have one last challenge. One last match left against you. You are still yet to truly earn your final gym badge, and you are still yet to truly show off that one species you promised to show me." Sam tried to hide his win-ce. He had been planning to use Drawcloak next. He'd forgotten about his promise to use Annihilape in a fight. Chuck seemed to sense that, and he gained an amused smile. Glancing over to the side, he gestured for a gym trainer to come closer, and a muscled woman in a tank top ran over to receive his commands. He told her to take over his next few scheduled matches. He then looked back. "Sam, you and I will be moving off to have our final match for your challenge," Chuck said in a quieter voice. "This will decide whether or not you've passed the makeshift crash course I've inflicted on you. This battle is going to be very important because we're going to do it now, before you have too much time to prepare. Also," he chuckled to himself, "also, you're from home. So it'll be a double battle. To decide whether or not you earn my Storm badge, you'll need to win in a double battle match against the strongest two Pokémon on my team." Chapter 142. Drawcloak. Annihilape. Chuck didn't even realize what he had done, Sam could tell. He had challenged Sam to a battle on short notice, but he had also challenged Sam to a battle in which Sam had no choice for the Pokémon on his team. It wasn't just that he was caught off guard, it was also that he was utterly unprepared. Sam had his strategies. He had taken part in plenty of double battles before. He had his planned team UPS and strategies like with many things involving Typhlosion. She was a great partner for any ghost type thanks to how she could provide smoke and shadows to help them hide. But this wasn't a standalone battle. It was a battle that was part of an ongoing challenge. Sam wasn't allowed to use a Pokémon more than once, and Typhlosion had already fought. Same as Miss Magius. Same as Haunter. And also, same as Trevenant. That meant he only had two reasonable choices left, Drawcloak and Annihilape. Drawcloak would have done well in a single battle, but she had also only just agreed to help Sam fight. Competing in a double battle would be more complex than anything they had planned, and it wasn't like Annihilape could be much help. While the combination of a strong physical attacker and a speedy special attacker seemed good on paper, Annihilape wouldn't know which of her moves to look out for, and Drawcloak had never practiced preventing another Pokémon from ganging up on her ally. While there was the potential for synergy, these two had never practiced together. Chuck wanted this match to happen now to prevent Sam from having time to plan, and he'd truly achieved that, just not at the level he realized. I'm screwed. Clearing his throat, Sam spoke up, trying to speak with as much confidence as he could. Do you mind if I send out my Pokémon? Not to strategize, but just to fill them in on what's going on. Chuck didn't turn to look at Sam. Perhaps. Sam waited for Chuck to explain further than that, but the heavy man did nothing but continue down the path through the forest that'd bring them back to his home. He wasn't going to say anything else. Sam wouldn't be given time. Gah. He'll want us to start the second we get there, but then again, we have to get there, first. Hurriedly, Sam dropped a few feet back, beckoning something over from between the trees. Drawcloak had been following along in the sparse shadows of the thin canopy, and the moment Sam gestured to her, she sent Chuck a nervous glance and darted over to float at his side. Okay. 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 Sam took a deep breath in, but it barely helped him get his thoughts in order. Okay, Drawcloak. We'll be fighting in a double battle. That means I'll be sending out you alongside someone else, and then Chuck will be sending out 2 Pokémon in exchange. Dreepa let out an excited squeak on her head, but Drawcloak looked unconvinced. We don't have much time, but I trust you. For the battle, I need you to fight alongside Annihilape, who will try to give you as many openings as possible. You have to focus on damage. He'll only be able to hold off Chuck's Pokémon for so long, so take advantage of every slight opportunity and try to feint at least one of them as soon as you can. Annihilape would be an easy target to overwhelm in melee, especially since he'd likely be targeted by both of Chuck's ground-based Pokémon. Focusing him down could give Chuck the numbers advantage to turn the match in his favor. That was why Sam wanted Drawcloak to knock out Chuck's Pokémon as fast as possible. He wanted the numbers advantage for his team, and he didn't want them to gang up on her. This plan was barely a strategy, but it was still a guide to get through the math. Annihilape on defense, and Drawcloak on attack. She'd try to use her powerful special moves to take them out, and Sam would hope for the best. Thankfully, that little bit of talking, as basic as it was, assuaged Drawcloak's nerves. As new of a concept as a double battle was, she was used to them. After all, she'd been fighting alongside Dreepa for all those years on her own. It also helped that Drawcloak tolerated Annihilape more than any other member of the team save for Trevenant, who had been unintentionally bribing her with berries. Miss Magius and Typhlosion were the ones to find and fight her during the hunt in Olivine, so she held a grudge. As for Haunter, she was fine with him, but he could get a bit too goofy for her liking. Thank you, Sam said. And I'm sorry. I know you wanted a one-on-one match to prove yourself, but I promise that this will work, too. Chuck will be using his strongest Pokémon, and I'll be relying on you for damage, so this will be the chance I promised. Both Drawcloak and Dreepa responded with identical nods that all but proved their family connection, and then Drawcloak moved back to the trees to follow along. Not long after that, everyone stepped out of the woods, having returned to that sandy area behind Chuck's home. Chuck didn't slow in the slightest, striding right toward the clear area behind his house. At this point in the day, the building was empty. His wife ran a medicine shop in town, so she was currently out managing that. Sam wanted to slow down, but showing weakness here would just cost him momentum. He continued on to find a place across from Chuck, positioning himself so that they were approximately a field's length apart. There we go. Chuck's voice boomed. As he spoke, he released a pair of Machoke that would facilitate the foresight on Sam's Pokémon. Plenty of room for a battle. This is the match we've been waiting for. His teeth almost seemed to shine in the midday sun, and he retrieved a pair of weathered pokeballs from his baggy pants. He held them in hand, waiting for Sam to make his choice, but Sam had already been forced to make his choice. It wasn't like he was able to use anyone else. Any special rules? Sam asked. Chuck shook his head. Double battle. No switching, of course. We'll both use 2 Pokémon until one side is defeated. Sam nodded once, keeping his gaze even. He sent a glance to where Drawcloak was now hiding in the shadows beneath the deck of Chuck's house. Her yellow eyes glowed in the dark. For this fight, they were at a disadvantage, not necessarily in strength, but definitely in experience. Yet, there was still the potential to earn their 8th gym badge. Sam might have had little time to plan, but he had already spent hours observing Chuck's team. Drawcloak might not have been in any official battles before, but she was undeniably strong. Annilope's countless practice sessions and spars against Ursaring meant he was Sam's best bet at handling physical attackers. We haven't lost yet. There was no sense in falling to nerves. Finally managing to calm down and feel a bit confident, Sam tossed forward a ball at the same moment Chuck threw 2. Drawcloak zipped out of her hiding space to join Annilope's side, and Chuck's strongest 2 Pokémon appeared on the field next to each other. Immediately, Poliwrath and Primeape posed, flexing in unison the moment they landed. But Chuck's eyes were not on them. There. That's it. That's really it. You weren't kidding. An evolution of Primeape. Chuck danced on his feet. He's big. He's strong. And he looks mean. Chuck pressed his hands to his chin and leaned forward. Sam was having trouble picturing him as a gym leader right now. He's called Annilope, Sam said, making sure to control his reaction. He's a ghost fighting type. Stronger than any Primeape. You'll see what I mean during our match. Chuck blinked when he realized what he was doing, and then the man leaned back to right himself as he cleared his throat. Of course, he said, pretending he hadn't just done that. The best way to learn about a Pokémon is to face it in a fight. His body bounced alongside his laughter, but when he brought his gaze back down, he no longer looked as jolly as before. Chuck stared at the field with a wide, predatory smile. Here we go. The 2 Machoke used their foresight, simultaneously serving as the referees for this match. In a synchronized shout, they shouted their names to mark the start of the match. Sam pointed forward, and Chuck took up a wide fighting stance while letting out a roar. Hit! That! Pokémon! Each word was punctuated by a punch. Immediately, his Poliwrath and Primeape charged. Chuck's Primeape charged arm over leg, and his Poliwrath maintained a consistent pace with its fists clenched at its sides. They moved as a pair, their years of shared experience coming into play, and Sam did his best to give his own orders as fast as he could. Annilope, bulk up. As much as you can. Focus on defense, and Drawcloak use Dragon Pulse whenever there's an opening. Annilope didn't run to meet Chuck's Pokémon. He watched them calmly while breathing out, his adrenaline spiking under his control. His body went tense under the effects of bulk up as all aspects of his physical strength increased. Nearby, Drawcloak slid through the air to position herself off to the back and off the side. Then, the fighting types met. 2 sets of fists were thrown forward. Annilope snapped up his hands, blocking them with his palms. The field was frozen as Annilope's eyes met their own. And then Chuck's Pokémon both gained what could only be a malicious grin. The Primeape was explosive. It was a menace, fighting as if trying to tear Annilope apart. For as much control and technique Chuck provided, this Primeape was furious. It used fury swipes and karate chops, weak moves, to attack as fast as possible to lay claim to all of his attention. Meanwhile, the Poliwrath tried to take advantage of that. Whenever Annilope seemed too focused on the Primeape, it would punch, generally being blocked by a snapped-out arm or a palm. However, where the Primeape was quick and weak, this Poliwrath was slow and strong. Together, they were a perfect storm of overwhelming chaos and slow, deliberate power. They ganged up on Annilope, which was what Sam wanted, but they were also simply too much. He was forced to focus on defense even more than expected, and neither Primeape nor Poliwrath were ever opened up to further attacks. Drawcloak did try to launch a few testing moves, using Dragon Pulse once or twice with Dragon-type energy alone just to see how these Pokémon would react. She was hesitant to send Dreepa close, and she was right to be. Whenever her attacks neared, one of the two Pokémon would take over the assault on Annilope, and then the other would snap out a punch that never failed to disrupt her attack. She did not want to send Dreepa to them. Sam could see that Annilope was already being pushed back. With bulk up, his strength matched theirs, but he simply lacked the trained skill to handle two opponents at once. "Is this all you're offering me, Sam? This is supposed to be a double battle. I expected more from you. You're making me feel like I'm bullying your Pokémon instead of competing in a fight." A vein throbbed on Annilope's head at the taunt, but he had long since mastered his rage. Gracefully, he continued to block and defend against these attacks, but it was also blatantly obvious that each impact was wearing him out. "We're running out of time," Sam realized. Drawcloak looked frustrated. Dreepa was impatient. They wanted to unleash their moves, but Chuck simply wasn't giving them any way to fight. Annilope was becoming more and more injured, and eventually, Sam just had to call for it. Rage Fist. He had to use this move now before Annilope became too damaged and risked fainting. Right away, Annilope drew back an arm, and the Primeape jumped to the front, preparing itself for this attack. However, when Annilope's fist grew and grew and grew, the Poliwrath snapped out a hand to grab Primeape's fur and yank it far back. The two Pokémon jumped away, and Annilope's fist smashed into the ground with a cataclysmic effect. Cracks were left in the earth, which was impressive. Sam wasn't sure how Annilope managed that given the field was mostly sand. "Whew! Almost lost, there." Primeape is used to relying on counter, but counter can't work if you faint before it goes off. With that single attack, Annilope had somehow forced the match to enter a lull. That continued even as he pulled his arm back with neither opposing Pokémon risking getting close. The tension in his body lingered. The threat he carried was clear, though Rage Fist seemed like a finisher, it was just a move. Annilope could use it again any time he wanted. For now, both of Chuck's Pokémon stayed back, far too wary of getting close. Annilope huffed and puffed out of anger and exhaustion. He had taken a massive amount of damage, but that didn't mean he wasn't a threat. With both sides unwilling to get close, the silence continued even though there was one Pokémon that should have acted. This was the perfect time for Drawcloak to attack. Annilope's Rage Fist represented a threat that Chuck's Pokémon would need to avoid, but she did nothing to take advantage of that. The only thing she did was grimace. As much as she wanted to attack, she just didn't want to risk Dreepa. I can't forget that this is Drawcloak's first real battle with us. I've been trying to give her the chance to attack when it feels right based on her instincts, but I have to remember she doesn't have the same battle experience as the rest of the Pokémon on my team. She wants to be strong and is strong, but she's only halfway there. When her moves hit, they really hit, but if she never uses them. Chuck used this moment to give another command. Water Gun. Rock Slide. If his Pokémon couldn't get close, they could instead attack from range. The Poliwrath pulled its arms in to fire out a stream of water from the center of its belly. Next to it, the Primeape dug its hands into the earth to tear it up, throwing out hardened chunks of the field that hurtled toward Annilope. Dodge! Annilope leaped to the side, using his enlarged arm to support a full body flip. Chuck's Pokémon prepared for another combo, and Sam realized he had to make a decision. "We don't have a plan. We don't have time to make one. I can only call for what we already know right now." He recognized that this was what Chuck was talking about, he'd been over-reliant on making plans. When faced with the unexpected, all he would do was freeze up. To be a great trainer, he needed to fix that. "I have to trust my gut. We got this far for a reason." A new pair of attacks hurtled toward Annilope. He was just barely able to dodge a second time, but he wouldn't be able to do so again. So what's my gut telling me? Poliwrath is an unknown factor, but Primeape isn't. That means, for all Chuck has done to train his Primeape, I know how it might respond because I've trained one myself. He knew the species' weaknesses. He recognized that if they were to win, they needed to eliminate Poliwrath from the equation. "Annilope. I'm sorry." Sam called out. "Remember Typhlosion, and target Poliwrath. Use Curse." They'd never practiced this before. Annilope only had so much experience with the ghost type. However, he had trained Curse in the past, although he'd only ever trained it as an enhancing move. But Sam had a gut feeling about this, Annilope would be able to pull this off. Typhlosion had demonstrated it plenty of times before, and he at least had some understanding of the ghost type given he was now that type as well as his familiarity with Rage Fist. There was certainly a pause, a brief one. Annihilape wasn't sure how to properly use this move. He didn't know Shadow Ball, Hex, or any other attack that could conjure external energy, but what he could do was cycle it through himself. So, in between dodging attacks, the same arm he used for Rage Fist suddenly became wreathed in black. Chuck shouted something, but Sam didn't hear it. He watched as Annihilape took his fingers and dragged them across his chest. Chuck's 2 Pokémon attempted to race forward to stop him, but they both failed. When Annihilape's hand dug into his flesh, shadowy flames sparked out and seemed to burn his fur. His expression immediately contorted into a grimace as he fell to one knee. He did not have the energy to stay up, but he was at least able to send all of his anger to Poliwrath in a glare. Ultimately, he fainted. The self-damage of curse was simply too much. But he had been successful. Poliwrath was now cursed. Now, draw cloak! Sam shouted as the Poliwrath stumbled. Take to the skies. She blinked at first as if just realizing she wasn't just an observer in the match. Looking around and realizing everyone's attention was on her, she hesitated but only for a single second. A knowing glint entered her eyes as she took to the sky, and she stared down with a predatory grin when it became clear that neither Primeape nor Poliwrath could reach her with their best moves. Good, Sam sighed. It worked. Now Poliwrath is on a timer, and we only have to worry about one Pokémon, a Pokémon that I trained for months. Yet, despite this sudden twist, it came at a cost. Sam only had one Pokémon on his side of the field. Chuck still had 2. But they're not fainted just yet. Chuck roared. Keep up the same moves. Prepare yourselves. And use taunt to bring that dragon right out of the sky. Hurriedly, Sam shouted his best counter-command. Damage only, draw cloak. Stay in the sky and only worry about using Dragon Pulse. The Primeape hopped between its feet, shouting insults, and the Poliwrath glared with perfect eye contact. Drawcloak had definitely fallen to their taunts with how annoyed she looked, but she didn't zip down. With her decision-making affected by taunt, Dreepa served as her messenger, instead. Suddenly cloaked in dragon-type energy, Dreepa screamed in delight as he hurtled toward the earth. He aimed himself at Poliwrath, who brought up its arms to defend. It blocked the move, minimizing the damage, but thanks to Curse, it didn't quite have the energy to attack back, and Dreepa was able to return. Quickly, Chuck changed gears. The smile faded from his face. Water gun. Rock slide, he ordered. His 2 Pokémon unleashed their attacks, but it didn't exactly work. Drawcloak was fast. Not necessarily as fast as she could be with agility, but enough that she could move out of the way of these moves. There was a travel time before these attacks could reach her, so she could see their paths to know where she needed to move to dodge. Counter to that, when it came to her own moves, she didn't need to worry about accuracy. Even though she was unable to use lock-on, Dreepa had enough influence to chase down her foes when launched from her head. Rocks were thrown. Water was launched. Drawcloak shot around through the air. The Primeape grew in anger, and the Poliwrath's moves became less accurate over time. With how painful Curse could become, Poliwrath tried its best to push through but eventually took a knee. Its body was tense, and its lack of offense lessened the pressure on Drawcloak. Taunt was supposed to bring her out of the air, but it wasn't enough given how she could simply send Dreepa down instead. Once more, she used Dragon Pulse, staying in the air and grinning to herself at the ease at which she used the move. The Poliwrath looked up and saw the knockout blow coming. Proudly, it took the strike right to its chest. And then Chuck shouted for one final command. Grab it! It was the Primeape that acted, causing Drawcloak's eyes to widen. Though her brother was her projectile, she really didn't want him to get hurt, either. Poliwrath fainted, but Primeape was conscious and was still right there. With a single lunge, it easily clapped its hands together around Dreepa, and he disappeared. Silence echoed out. Dreepa was unable to fly back. With a cheeky grin, the Primeape hopped between its feet, and Chuck looked extremely smug. If you want him back, you'll have to get him, the gym leader taunted. The Primeape taunted too, letting out a hollering laugh, but then it froze when Dreepa stuck his head out. He phased through its hand, looked around, and then flew back up into the sky. In almost a perfect mimicry of Poliwrath before him, Chuck fell to his knees. 2 Machoke. 2 Pokémon. Foresight was used on Annihilape and Drawcloak, but you're Dreepa. His voice sounded drained. Dreepa isn't fighting in this match, Sam said, unable to suppress his grin. He's a projectile, not a combatant. It wouldn't make sense for foresight to affect something like a shadow ball. Why would he become physical just to deliver Drawcloak's attacks? Back in place, Dreepa nodded, simply agreeing with all of Sam's words. After spending a moment to take that in, Chuck laughed, and laughed, and laughed. His Primeape was certainly stronger than Drawcloak, but some Pokémon were vulnerable to perfect counters. Sam had Drawcloak fly that high for a reason. She had no chance to defeat her opponent on the ground. But up there, she could avoid Primeape's weak ranged attacks with ease and retaliate with moves that were impossible to dodge thanks to Dreepa's influence on her aim. Maybe if Poliwrath had stuck around, it might have had a special move to make dodging harder. Except, Annilope's curse meant it fainted. There was a reason Sam called for that. He knew his Pokémon's weaknesses, therefore he knew this Primeape's weaknesses as well. This wasn't exactly the test of strength Chuck had wanted, but he seemed to acknowledge that he'd lost and returned his Pokémon there. Drawcloak was genuinely in an unbeatable position. There was nothing his Primeape could do to her while she was up there. It's funny, Chuck said as he returned to his feet. Poliwrath is better at handling airborne enemies. If he aims his water gun, he can take them out, but Primeape can't do the same with Rock Slide. Sam nodded. That's why I made the snap decision to have Annilope use Curse. I knew he'd faint if he was successful, but we needed to take out Poliwrath early. I've trained a Primeape. I've evolved a Primeape. I've seen how that line can't do much against Pokémon that can fly. Annilope also knew Rock Slide, but he'd lose to Drawcloak just the same. With the match having ended, Drawcloak finally left the sky to return to the earth. She looked exhausted, but she also simultaneously looked proud. Upon laying her eyes on the gym leader, she puffed up her chest. Her eyes sparkled in delight at her victory. It was more than just her being a victorious dragon type. With her flight trick, she'd also won like a ghost. Chuck just laughed to himself. Despite his defeat, he'd enjoyed the match. Ah, well. Can't win them all. Here. He reached into his pocket to throw something shiny Sam's way. Sam saw the object hurtle toward him too far to catch, but then Dreepa pushed off of Drawcloak's head to fling himself right at it. He snapped the item out of the air and proceeded to glide. He deposited it into Sam's hand and let out a purr when Sam rubbed his head in thanks. That's the Storm Badge. You earned it a while ago. This was a good match, a good series of matches. But I imagine that Jasmine was more difficult for you. Chuck let out a sigh as he walked closer. Sam hadn't seen him look that disappointed before. I do have my strengths, but my team is only 9 stars at best. Together, Primeape and Poliwrath might be considered 10, but they also have too many easy weaknesses for them to truly be at that level of strength. When he and Chuck met off to the side of the field to shake hands, Chuck's grip was firm. It honestly hurt somewhat, but Sam wanted to appear confident and didn't let that show. Now then, business. So, are you willing to teach me how to evolve a Primeape? Excitedly, Chuck leaned in. But Sam didn't speak. He knew this could be a bargain. He knew he stood to make quite a bit. But when he thought back to Annilope's evolution, he grimaced. He couldn't bring himself to share that information. Not yet. I can't, Sam said with a reluctant sigh. Annilope is a ghost type. His evolution can be dangerous. What we almost went through. I don't want others to risk the same. I know I'm asking a lot, but are you willing to wait? I'll show him off in the conference, and I will share more about his evolution, but only after once we have a better understanding of how it worked. Sam knew there was a lot he stood to learn. There were so many more ghost types still out there. And, despite the countless answers he had in his pack, he knew he didn't have all of them. Primeape had evolved into Annilope by using Rage Fist, so what? There was a risk involved, a risk he didn't fully understand, and he wouldn't be able to live with himself if he gave Chuck information that caused him to fail. We need more time to think, Sam ended up saying. Once the season was over, he would be able to put more thought into Annilope's evolution method. He would also be able to put thought into everything else he knew and figure out what to do about that. I understand, Chuck said, his voice surprisingly serious. If it's that dangerous, then it's right to not rush it. Your Annilope might look healthy, but that's not much. So we'll wait, he continued. After all, I can't say I'm too familiar with the ghost type, myself. I'd rather us stay safe, but until then, he regained his smile. Call us whenever you're ready. Once you're willing, we can make a deal. Later, When Sam was set to leave, he found himself suddenly whisked away by Chuck's wife. She brought him to her kitchen table, where she unrolled a map and sent him a firm yet amiable look that told him they were to have a discussion. "My husband tells me you're leaving tomorrow." She clicked her tongue. "It's such a shame. You only just arrived. You've barely spent 2 days in our little town." "Sorry," Sam said, "but we really need to train for the conference. Mastering the ghost type is our priority, and the Ilex Forest is the best place to do that." She hummed to herself and glanced down at the map. Sam went on to fully explain his plan. He would take a boat to Goldenrod, travel south and then enter the Ilex Forest from Route 34. "Except," the woman interrupted, her finger tracing the route Sam had just described, "that will take a while. Adding up the time spent on the boat ride, traveling down the route, and then getting through the forest, your potential training time will be cut in half." Sam grimaced. He had a bit over 2 weeks left until the conference. He needed to spend as much time as possible in training. He needed to be ready for more than just the newbie trainers competing there. But as much as she had a point about how long travel would take, it wasn't like he had anything else he could do. Cutting back on the number of times he stopped to practice would drastically increase his speed, but the Ilex Forest was still a distance away from Keenwood City. "Ah! You're forgetting something," she said, gaining a slight smirk. "Look closer. Most maps don't make this obvious, but there's more to a region than just cities connected by routes." Checking the map again, Sam inspected it more closely and tried to pick out all the little details. The mountain ranges were labeled. Small patches of forests were included. It named caves he'd never seen. He could trace the exact shape of all of Johto's routes as well as the vehicle paths people used to travel safely between cities. But there was more to it than just that. Outside of the main roads and routes, there were also smaller trails and paths. Except, no, that wasn't right. That wasn't what she wanted him to see. Sam eyed a blue line that marked a river that almost divided the Ilex Forest in half. "Closer," she said. Sam squinted his eyes. Finally, he found it. He wasn't sure how he had failed to notice them, but there was a scattering of small, black dots that each represented a small village or settlement not built along the main paths. "Hold on, but I traveled off-route? I never saw any of these smaller towns," Sam said. Chuck's wife huffed out of annoyance. "Where did you travel?" "From Violet to Blackthorn." "So you're telling me that you didn't find any towns in the Blackthorn Mountains, where the Blackthorn clan trains and manages a bunch of wild dragon types?" "Good point." Thankfully, she just let out a short laugh at Sam's mistake before tapping Keenwood City's location on the western side of the map. "So, what I was trying to say is that you have better options to follow. You understand that Keenwood has quite an extensive port, yes?" He nodded. "Then, instead of taking a boat directly to Goldenrod, consider heading somewhere else," she said. She went on to use her finger to trace a route through the ocean that headed south instead of east toward Johto's mainland. She proposed a plan that passed by several islands and came to its end right where the Ilex Forest's river connected to the coast. "There," she said, tapping it once. "The town here, the one just past Alto Mare. The Ilex Forest isn't just a massive section of untamed wilderness. Plenty of people live within. This town here serves to ship out many of its collected resources, so if you want to cut down on your travel time, I can take a boat directly there," Sam concluded, eyes going wide. She brought her chin up proudly, sending Sam a slight smile. She then went on to trace the proposed route even further, bringing it all the way up the river to the very center of the forest. "You won't find villages in the forest unless you look for them, but plenty exist along this river, and they need ways to travel, too," she said. "If you go to that port town I mentioned, you should be able to get a ferry ticket that'll take you where you need." "So you're saying that I can take a boat to not just the edge of Ilex, but to its deepest parts?" Sam asked. "At least, as deep as wherever Arbaville is," she finished, referencing a town that existed just past the river's end. Breathing in, Sam stared at the map. He needed to spend as much time as possible to prepare for the conference, and travel had been a big worry of his. Now, although the deadline continued to creep closer by the day, he had the chance to take a massive shortcut and effectively double the time he had left. "This is amazing. We'll be able to get there so much quicker. With how fast a boat can travel, we might actually get a full 2 weeks. This is going to help us save so much time." Chapter 143. This boat will take you to the edge of the ilex forest, but you'll need to purchase a ferry ticket on your own. The important part is not to lose track of time once you're there. When the season ends, you'll only have a week to reach Silver Town. If you fail to register in time, you won't be able to compete in the conference, Chuck's wife said. I understand. Thank you. Sam bowed his head low in thanks. The gym leader himself wasn't there to see him off since Chuck was satisfied with parting ways after a good match. He was already back to taking on challengers. I think, once the season is over, I should have plenty of time to get back to Azalea Town. There are teleports offered to trainers, right? Only certain ones, and they're expensive. But I should be able to afford at least one, Sam said. It'd take everything I have left, and even if it's more than that, I'm sure I can find at least one other person to help pay. The woman laughed quietly. Yes, that would work. You'll be pretty lucky, too. Even if you spend all your money, most restaurants in Silvertown will let competitors eat for free. Reedy will enjoy that. Sam thanked her one last time before boarding the boat, and with a final goodbye, he was off. The ship was much bigger than the speeder he took last time, but it was still fast, and it left the oh-so-similar to Dewford Keenwood City behind. Overall, the trip on this boat wouldn't be quick, but it would be faster than his original plan. This boat was one of several that helped with delivering Chenwood's specialty medicines, but instead of going to the mainland, it visited islands in a handful of cities along Johto's coast. There were many stops, but each stop was quick given the importance of the ship's cargo, and Sam was able to tag along since he promised to help out. There was no question at this point that people were taking notice of Annilope when he and Sam helped carry the crates, but so close to the conference, spreading a few rumors would actually help. It obscured their exact position while also building legitimacy so that more people would recognize them once Annilope was officially revealed. Sam only felt excitement, and over the few days he spent on the ship, that feeling grew. It got to the point that he started to struggle to fall asleep at night, so he frequently chose to sleep on the ship's deck. His ghost-type team members helped him get away with that, making sure he went unbothered but also making sure he wouldn't fall off. Being able to see the countless stars in the sky let him relax, and the many pinpricks of light almost served as reminders of how far his journey had taken him. Tiflosion, Sam said quietly one night. She'd been much more affectionate recently and hadn't left his side. Do you remember how we used to be? How much time we would spend inside? Sure, we'd head out to search for ghost types sometimes, but I'd usually be reading, checking the forums, or helping Mom around the shop. Back then, I don't know. It felt like I was almost in a haze. I wanted to go on a journey, but I couldn't bring myself to. I guess, after Grandpa, I just... His words got caught in his throat. He couldn't bring himself to say anything else. A mist started to cloud the sky, but he wiped it away as Tiflosion pressed herself against his side. Thank you, Sam said. For everything. Thank you for everything you've ever done. You've never stopped supporting me, and we're almost there. The conference is so close. And I can never forget how you managed to evolve. Tiflosion sent him a sharp grin as she looked up at him, her eyes sparkling with pride. Although, Sam could have sworn he saw a guilty expression briefly flash over her face, but he didn't press. He didn't want to ruin the moment. There'll be more than just Reedy and Xavier waiting for us there, he said quietly as he stared up at the stars. We beat every gym leader in Johto, but so has everyone else who'll be competing. So many people there won't just be beginners. We'll be facing people with seasons of experience, but you know what? We'll be ready, Sam promised. As long as we're clever, I know we'll find a way to win. More than anything else, he wanted to stand with his team at the top. Sam continued to share his plans with Tiflosion that night, eventually falling asleep with his ghost types surrounding him. He woke up in a proper bed the next morning and resumed helping out over the trip. As they traveled, Miss Magius, Haunter, and Tiflosion all worked to make sure the various Ghastly stayed on board and didn't get too stir-crazy to think about floating off. When the ship finally docked in the river town at the edge of the ilex forest, Sam thanked the captain and helped unload the last few deliveries before dashing off. Shadows swarmed him as his various ghost types stretched their legs. Just barely, he managed to reach a ferry right before it left. The people who managed it were a little annoyed at the last-minute boarding, but paying for a ticket helped. Wind blew past him. Leaning against the boat's back railing let him watch the water pass them by while Tiflosion stared into the woods, nervous yet alert. A few other trainers were also on board, but most of them were just returning home after a hard-fought season. Truthfully, Sam was the only person here insane enough to head into the deepest parts of Ilex Forest to train. Being so close to his goal, Sam could truly recognize just how far he and his team had come. Over the past few months, his understanding of not just his team but battling in general had grown by leaps and bounds. He had so much that he'd drawn from. In Blackthorn, Will taught Sam about the importance of not forgetting to use strong attacks. In Ecruteak, Morty taught Sam about the many advanced strategies ghost types could use to win. Jasmine taught Sam that he should use status moves even more, and then Chuck's help was the most general yet most helpful when it came to relying on strategies in fights. Sam learned that he would not be able to reach the heights he desired through pre-made plans alone. The way he pictured the mindset of battling was now like a big tree. A trainer's main strategy, the goal they needed to achieve to win, was the trunk, but that strategy was only the default. Each branch that grew off the trunk was a modification that came based on circumstance and situation. Different opponents required different perspectives, and even then, those branches split off even further into specific moves and counters the tree's leaves and twigs. For Sam's team, their main strategy wasn't the use of status moves but the concept of always having their opponent be worse off. Status moves played into that, but they had plenty of other tricks, like hiding in shadows to lower accuracy or just keeping distance to mess with their opponent's plans. "We have the same goals as before, the same status moves I'd like everyone to learn," Sam said to Typhlosion as the fairy carried them along. "Stuff like Destiny Bond, Pain Split, Curse, Will-O-Wisp," he let out a breath. "And then I want to add new stuff, too. Thunder Wave, for example, since it's all about speed control and move prevention. There's also the idea of teaching more than just Haunter those disruptive moves like Grudge and Spite." Strategy-wise, Sam had the basics, but he'd need to spend this time creating more advanced strategies. Chuck's advice, as well as everything else he'd learned, was at the forefront of his mind, and Sam had to train himself to give commands that were instinctual reactions instead of just previously thought-up shouts. His thoughts were occupied by that topic all the way up the river, even as the ferry stopped in a variety of small towns. Although, he was momentarily struck by the thought that, out here, the tiny contingents of rangers and ace trainers that protected these towns had teams weaker than his own. The vast majority of trainers never got higher than 5 or 6-star teams, and Sam was currently at 8. Somehow, he and his Pokémon had managed to reach a height that only a small percentage of teams ever reached. But they could go higher. Now wasn't the time to relax. This period was for training, for building themselves to bridge the gap between them and the most experienced competitors. When the boat eventually reached its final stop, Sam returned Typhlosion and practically hopped off to reach the forest's floor. There, he raced down the singular dirt path that took him past Arbaville, through the trees, and towards Ilex's deepest woods. "Hey! Be careful!" Sam didn't get anywhere near as far as he expected while heading down that well-tread road. The path seemed to have been flattened by Pokémon more than people, but clearly, the nearby village of Arbaville frequently relied on it as well. Out here, the trees were tall, but they weren't tall enough yet. Light still managed to pierce through their leaves. Sam was looking for a place where the truly ancient trunks blotted out the skies, but the only hint to what he searched for was the skyscraper-sized trunk laying on its side ahead of him. The path followed a tunnel that had been carved straight through its bark. "Didn't you hear me the first time? Don't just keep walking. I told you to be careful." From atop that massive, fallen log, a young woman ran down its sloped side and hopped to the forest floor. Landing with grace, she sent Sam an annoyed look, running a hand through her tied-back green hair. "Look, kid, if you don't know what's waiting for you past there, you shouldn't go further in than here. This tree is here for a reason, it's a marker. The Pokémon on the other side are all wild. Other things lurk in the woods, too." But Sam just smiled. "Yeah, that's exactly why we're here. My team and I need that, and it's not like we aren't prepared. We're out here to train, but we're also a team of ghost types. Any ghost, spirit, or anything else that tries to disturb us won't be a problem at all." His grin was met with a flat look, and the woman replied with a groan. "Oh, so you're one of them, huh? The crazies. The battle-hungry. Those weird trainers that are way too confident. Just another person heading somewhere dangerous to risk themselves for the sole sake of pushing their team. I just wanted to practice in the shadows," Sam mumbled. The woman waved her hand. "That's basically the same thing," she said. She took another moment to look over Sam, and he did his best to stand tall and confident instead of shuffling around his feet. Once she seemed to be finished, she sighed and she reached a satchel at her waist to take out a cloth-wrapped loaf. "All right, so it might not actually be that dangerous, but I needed to warn you anyway," she said. "If you're so motivated to head in no matter what, the least you can do is take this." "What is it?" Sam asked. "Berry loaf. Bread with berries baked into it. Keeping it on you is for the best. It should help to keep the voice of the forest at bay." She sent him a slight smile, and a pause stretched out between them. Then, she let out another groan when the ominous-sounding name only seemed to widen Sam's grin. "You have ghost types. So you have creepy interests. Right, of course. Who else would ever come here?" She grumbled and pressed a hand to her forehead. "Then, let me give you this warning, if you hear a voice cry out for help, ignore it. Stay exactly where you are, don't move a muscle, and absolutely do not leave the main path." Sam wanted to ask more questions, but the woman just turned around in a huff. She began to head back to wherever Arbaville was, not even bothering to check on Sam even as she walked away. He shouted to ask for her name. He didn't want a repeat of what happened in Kianwood. "Diana," she yelled. And then she was gone, disappearing between the trees, and Sam turned back to that massive, fallen trunk. Shoving the bread into his jacket pocket, he breathed in and passed underneath to finally reach the place he'd been trying to get to all this time. Mostly. Again, the trees weren't tall enough yet. So the voice of the forest, "Hey? Sounds like a spirit, or maybe a ghost." Sam sent a glance to his side. "What do you think, Typhlosion?" She shrugged, having released herself the second Diana was gone and after they had passed through. Although, testing Sam's question, Typhlosion closed her eyes to focus, but all she did was slow down and shake her head. She didn't have any feeling or instinctual draw toward a nearby ghost, so if that voice of the forest was a ghost, it wasn't anywhere close by. Thanks, anyway." But Diana's warning was weird. She sounded serious. "I don't think it was a prank. It kind of reminds me of a few ghost stories I've read online, the ones about people entering a dark forest one day only to come out dazed and confused years later, acting as if no time had passed at all." Sam paused. Typhlosion was quiet. She kept her gaze locked straight ahead. As seconds of silence stretched out between them, Sam finally made a noise by letting out a short laugh. "Don't worry, we aren't going to miss the conference. Whatever it is, we'll be fine. Just remember, we have each other and everyone else to rely on. We also already have a bunch of experience with real spirits, too." But as confident as he was, Sam wasn't stupid mostly. He wasn't going to ignore Diana's warning. He knew those weird stories could actually be true. Given that he and his team had personally encountered real ghosts several times over, he wasn't going to dismiss a local legend. Those kinds of tall tales were always rooted in some kind of truth, so he promised himself to not do something dumb and walk toward any spooky voices. If he heard anything suspicious, he was going to do exactly what she said and stand completely still. Diana's warning represented a legitimate threat. But he was curious. "I'm sure I've read something about ghost types that lure travelers off the road. Maybe it's one of them? I'll check the new Pokédex once we find a place to take a break." Thoughts of training plans and now that mystery lingered even as the path thinned and gave way to untamed woods. Out here, the trees were large but yet to be at the size he wanted, and wild Pokémon were abundant around him. A family of Meryl and Azumarill played in a stream, and he even passed a meadow filled with Oddish, Gloom, and Bellossom. He didn't want to bother them, so he gave everything a wide berth, at one point pausing momentarily to let a lone Stantler cross through the trees ahead of him. It'd be a while until he reached the truly spooky parts of the forest, so he found a place to rest pretty soon in. Once he located a clear space beneath the trees where a nice, exposed root could serve as a bench, he released everyone on his team to have them go through some basic warm ups. Anilope and Trevenant moved off to exchange a series of slow-motion blows, practicing and predicting where one another would attack in an attempt to master their melee skills. Drawcloak left where she was hiding behind a nearby tree to float at the edge of the clearing. She didn't initially act as though she would do anything, but eager squeaks from Dreepa saw her begin practicing her moves and launching him forward, much to his delight. Above, the ghastly swarmed beneath the thin canopy, casting shadows that swallowed the sun. Meanwhile, Typhlosion stayed at Sam's side, maintaining a low burn around her neck, and Miss Magius kept to a nearby spot in the shade while repeatedly using nasty plot to practice keeping the move's energy under her control. The sole Pokémon that didn't reveal itself was Haunter, who was the only ghost left in Sam's shadow. Haunter would be training eventually. Half the reason they were out here was to help him evolve, but he was still unhappy about his loss to Chuck. He was staying at rest for now so that he would have the energy to truly throw himself into training once they properly reached the deepest parts of the woods. I'll prepare lunch in just a moment. My pack's stuffed with supplies, so it'll be nice to get some of that out. But since we have a bit of time. Sam sent Typhlosion a cheeky smirk and pulled out the new Pokédex. Sitting on that root, he plopped his backpack down next to him and began skimming through the book. No matter how hard he searched, he found nothing on the supposed voice of the forest. He couldn't find anything native to the Ilex forest that was relevant, but, again, the new Pokédex only really had information on Pokémon locations within a region's main routes. Nothing stood out to him, save for a single ghost-type species, Litwick. That Pokémon used its candlelight to lure travelers off of roads, but they would use light, not voice. Litwick were also only native to Unova and a few other regions. They weren't really present in Johto. I'm not sure what it is. Sam tried to look through the book again but found nothing. A warm breeze passed through their temporary camp. Maybe it is a real ghost? I've looked through all the ghost types and found nothing. Can't even find any psychic, dark, or can't believe I bothered grass-type species it might be. He went back to Litwick's entry and stared at it. That same warm breeze blew again. He tried reading through the page before freezing where he sat. That warmth was unsuitable for late fall. Frowning, Sam then realized something else. The camp was silent, and everyone had gone still. There'd been no shout. There'd been no spine-tingling wind. There had simply been nothing. All of his Pokémon had stopped in place to stare at a point a short distance away. Slowly, Sam brought up his head to follow their gaze. Everyone, Typhlosion and Miss Magius especially, stared right at the thing no one had noticed until now. It wasn't the voice of the forest. It wasn't a Pokémon. Honestly, it wasn't anything truly conscious. No, right there at the very edge of the clearing was a strange archway made of woven roots and leaves. The curious arch looked as though it had grown out of the ground. It was worn enough to have been there for quite some time, but Sam swore it hadn't been there before. He tried to deny its presence in his mind, but he had a clear memory of it being there when he had set up camp. The memory of it had always been there, but why hadn't it stood out? It'd been there when he first stopped to set up camp. It'd been there when he let everyone out. And it'd been there when he first started to read through the new Pokédex. But no one had been able to acknowledge it until now. He listened carefully. The forest was silent, and then he placed the new Pokédex on the root and stood up to approach. Typhlosion rose next to him, and they both cautiously approached the archway to try to figure out how it had appeared without ever appearing. However, it was utterly mundane. As strange as the archway seemed, it felt and looked as though it was nothing special. As far as he and Typhlosion could tell, it was just a normal arch that lacked any chill or presence to it that'd denote it as being from a ghost. Trevenant, Sam called out slowly. Did you make this? No. Trevenant had been too busy sparring with Annihilape. Ghastly, did any of you see this form? They looked among themselves. They're floating, ghostly spheres. All shook their heads for no. Uncomfortable, Sam licked his lips. He glanced over to ask another team member, but Miss Magius was already right there. He remembered that she was familiar with this forest. It was where she had lived. If anyone would know anything about this, it would have to be her. What about you, Miss Magius? Sam asked as he glanced between her and the archway. Do you know what this is? She stared at it. Her expression was empty. There was not a single hint of any emotion on her face. She didn't respond to Sam's question, but ever so slowly, she sent Typhlosion a look. The two of them made eye contact, and as Typhlosion pressed her ears down, Miss Magius replied with an almost imperceptible nod of her head. Typhlosion froze. Sam saw that same guilty look that had been more and more common these days once more rear its ugly head. She turned toward Sam and lowered her head. She nudged his team's pokeballs at his waist. Hold on. What are you doing? She went still when there was a shout. The yell didn't come from the forest, but it came from behind them. Out of everyone on the team, Drawcloak realized it first, and a horrible cry came from her throat. Immediately, Annihilape tore through the grove to try to stop them, but Miss Magius was prepared. Before he could get close, a blue glow wrapped around his form to throw him back with a psychic. Then, Typhlosion lunged, reaching at Sam to grab his belt and tear it away, stealing the Pokeballs of every member of his team. He looked up at her, but she didn't see him. Her eyes were squinted shut, and a grimace had overtaken her face. She didn't want to do this, but she had to. So what came next was simple. A single shove. Suddenly, Sam found himself stumbling through that archway, and the forest floor gave way beneath him. Typhlosion and Mismagius stared down at him as Sam fell and fell and fell. Both of them looked awful, but they both carried an expression of knowing this had to be done. And then they were gone. Sam was surrounded by darkness. Around him, fall gave way to summer. Summer gave way to spring. Spring gave way to winter. The cycle repeated. In the distance, he heard a voice cry out for help. Chapter 144. The forest floor was cold beneath Sam. He felt his hand press into damp detritus and long fallen leaves. The sun had vanished in the sky, plunging the world firmly into night. A few faint beams peeked through, but a heavy canopy otherwise blocked the moon's light. At least the trees are tall. He wasn't sure why, but he laughed. After everything, he found it ridiculous that his first thought was to celebrate that he was in the deepest parts of Ilex Forest. Sam pushed up into a seated position, somehow feeling both lucid and dazed at the same time. He had a clear memory of falling, but he wasn't sure where or what he had fallen through. He had passed through that arch, certainly, but it was like the blurry world that rushed past him had existed without existing at all. The only thing he knew was that he had gone somewhere and that right now, he was here. They pushed me. Why did they push me? That single question repeated over and over again in his mind as he sat on the forest floor. Why? Why did Mismagius trick him? Why did Typhlosion push him through the portal? Why did they rip his team's Pokeballs away? Why did no one else know? His stomach churned. He trusted his Pokémon. It shouldn't have happened. It felt like a betrayal, but when he pictured their expressions. Typhlosion looked like she was in just as much pain as I am right now. She didn't want to do it, but neither did Mismagius. Except, both of them did it anyway. They weren't happy. But they looked as though they thought they needed to do it no matter what. Did Mismagius know something? She lived in this forest. That has to be related to why she organized all of this in the first place. Sam knew his Pokémon. He knew that Mismagius had come up with the plan. Typhlosion would have never done something like this on her own without telling him first. It wasn't a prank, nor was it a trick. He'd been sent to a completely different part of the forest, alone, without anyone on his team, and without any form of supplies. Quickly, the thought made Sam check what he still had on him. As far as he could tell, he only had his clothes. His Pokémon were on the other side of that portal. His backpack was still where he'd placed it when he sat. The new Pokédex was likely where he'd left it on the route when he stood up. And Typhlosion now possessed all of his team's Pokeballs. That just left him. He couldn't help it. He laughed again. The berry bread. The loaf was still in his pocket. Weirdly, it was comforting to know he still had food. All right, Sam whispered to himself. You're alone in a forest with only a loaf of bread on your person. You have no water, shelter, or Pokémon to keep you safe. You have no devices to call for help, and since your team is responsible for pushing you in, no one is going to know they need to go out and search for you in the first place. He was trying to go over his situation to feel better, but he had to stop when he realized that nothing he said helped. He sat in silence, and then the faint cry of a wild Pokémon echoed in the distance. The sound reminded Sam of just how deep he was in the Ilex Forest. Dangerous Pokémon could be wandering out here. Without any Pokémon with him, he didn't have any good ways to defend himself. As bad as his situation was, it would have been easy to allow himself to fall into negative thoughts, but at this point, he had more than enough practice pushing past those. Instead, Sam simply took a deep breath and schooled his mind. If no one is around to help, then I have to help myself. My priorities are water and shelter. I also need to find a way to get to a town or a ranger station so I can call for help. If he had his full team with him or if people knew he was stuck out here, he would be better off staying in one place. However, all of the people who would worry about him thought he'd be out here for several weeks. They would only know he needed help if he didn't show up at the conference, and the conference was weeks away. Strapped for options, he recognized that only he could do anything to save himself. Thus, he chose a direction and began walking, searching for anything that could help him find a way back to his team. There wasn't much light out here given it was the middle of the night. He didn't remember passing out while falling, but he had experienced a sudden change in the time of day. It had been just about noon when he stopped to rest with everyone else. The strange time difference was a little weird, but right now, the important part was getting back. In the distance, another faint cry echoed out, and Sam was once more reminded of how wild Pokémon filled these woods. It also reminded him of the warning he'd been given. The voice of the forest. Is it responsible for this? Did it work with Mismagius? He wanted to get to the bottom of whatever happened, but again, his priority was returning to his team. So Sam walked, alone, hiking through the woods. Though it was dark, he didn't have much trouble seeing ahead of him. He was a bit worried about injuring himself by tripping on a root or the like, but the trees here were so large that any root was essentially building-sized. His path weaved. He had no clue what direction he was traveling, only that he was traveling somewhere. No matter what, he knew he'd find something eventually. He just needed to keep going forward, no matter how much his solitude caused his heart to hurt in his chest. But it wasn't too long into his trek that he saw a shadowy figure suddenly shift to his right. Instead of panicking, Sam felt nothing but relief. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm not alone. We're not alone. So they got you too, hey. The shadow attempted to dart behind a tree, and then sharp eyes peeked out from behind. They were trying their best to hide their appearance and maybe resemble something unique, but Sam could recognize that mischievous grin from anywhere. Haunter! Sam called out. Are you coming out? He heard a huff from his Pokémon, annoyed at how his scare had failed. Haunter left his shadowy hiding spot, and Sam had never felt as relieved as he did in that moment. Haunter didn't even look upset at his failure to scare him. If anything, he looked guilty for trying to do that to Sam right now, of all times. Are you alone? Alone other than me, Sam clarified when Haunter looked at him and giggled. He was hopeful as he waited for a response, but after a quick look around, Haunter just replied with an unfortunate shrug. So there aren't any ghastly nearby, and there's no one else from our team. It was only you out there? And I bet they didn't even mean to shove you through. You just happened to be in my shadow when I fell. After a few more quick questions, Sam was able to decipher the situation. Typhlosion and Mismagius had intended to send only Sam through, but they hadn't noticed Haunter. Everything had happened so fast that he'd never left his torpor. The only thing Haunter remembered was the last bit of falling, and then he and Sam were alone. While Sam was getting his bearings, Haunter had scampered off into another shadow when he recognized this perfect opportunity for a scare. Mismagius and Typhlosion pushed me through this weird archway thing, Sam explained. I fell, and then I think I woke up here? Anyway, as far as I can tell, we're still in Ilex Forest, but we're much deeper in. Everyone else should still be back at our campsite from before, so we need to find a way to return to the team. Raising an eyebrow, Haunter glanced around again. Sam did as well. They had certainly reached their target destination of the darkest parts of the forest, but right now wasn't exactly the time for training. Sorry, Haunter. I know you want to evolve, but this is an emergency situation. We can't just abandon everyone else. Despite Sam's words, Haunter didn't seem to think this was an emergency. He just snickered, basically seeing Mismagius and Typhlosion's actions as nothing more than a prank. He was a ghost type, after all. Meanwhile, Sam's feelings were more complicated than that. Haunter's reaction was more positive since those two possessed his absolute trust. While Sam logically knew that both would never do anything to hurt him, it was still painful to experience them planning something like this behind his back. I'm not a ghost type, so I'll need your help. I have food, but I don't have water or a place to stay, Sam said. It'll be safer to move when it's not night, so can you help me out? Search for anywhere I can rest or work to keep aggressive Pokémon away. Please, Haunter. I'm placing my safety in your hands. Immediately, Sam's request hit Haunter, and Haunter's expression turned serious. With the stiff demeanor of a professional, he sent Sam a salute to promise he'd get that done. And then he cackled at that action and slipped off, entering the nearby shadows to maintain a careful perimeter around Sam. Haunter would do exactly what Sam asked and search for a temporary shelter while also making sure any hostile wild Pokémon wouldn't approach. He was honestly one of the best Pokémon Sam could ask to have with him out here. Between Haunter's growing sensory abilities and his expertise with hypnosis, he could detect and ward away any attackers with ease. But there were downsides, too. Sam had no pokeballs on him, not even Haunter's. If Haunter became critically injured, Sam had no way to put him in stasis or use a potion for treatment. That meant Destiny Bond, while great at delaying a tough foe, was otherwise unusable. Same for any move that caused him to hurt himself, like the timer-inducing curse. The only way Haunter would be able to heal was if they were lucky enough to find an unguarded berry tree. Except, Sam knew just how rare something like that was. The berry bread could maybe provide a slight amount of healing, but Sam needed that bread for food, which meant Haunter could only really heal if given plenty of time to rest. But we'll be traveling. Staying in one place is just asking for a wild Pokémon to attack us. Haunter could rest in my shadow if he needs to, but if he ever gets knocked out, he won't be conscious enough to be able to dive in. With them being so far off route, avoiding threats was more important than fighting them off. Still, Sam felt much more confident knowing he had at least one Pokémon at his side. He resumed his hike with renewed energy, trekking over the uneven floor of dead leaves and scattered roots. This deep in the ilex forest, it honestly felt as though he was walking through a city's downtown district. The trees out here were so old that they matched the heights of skyscrapers. Grass-type energy could cause plants to grow into impressive things, and these trees had literal centuries to age while passively feeding on that. This place was ancient. It almost felt primordial, but it wasn't quite that. Eventually, Sam heard the sounds of uneven footsteps walking across the leaves, an attempt by Haunter to creep him out while also sending him a sign. However, it was hard to not notice the ghost-type's suppressed giggles, and Sam followed the signal to move around one of the massive trees. Haunter led him to a stream. Oh, good. Sam knelt at the water's edge in an attempt to look it over. He could see the barest shape of its banks while also hearing the constant movement of its flow. This stream might be good? I have no fire or any way to boil it, but if I can't find anything else. He was a bit thirsty, but he could at least wait until morning to see how clear the liquid was. If there were signs of water types nearby, he would know it'd be safe to drink. If they weren't, he would just have to keep moving. But the stream also represented something important. If it went on for long enough, there was a chance that following it could bring him to a river, and then following that river would give him decent odds of finding civilization. We'll look for a safe place to stay nearby, and then we'll follow the water once it's day. I don't know if it's safe to drink or not right now, but some more light will let me know how clear it is. The berry bread might let me bribe some water types into making some drinking water instead, but if we don't find any or if they're hostile, we'll just need to keep going until we're back. He heard something shift behind him, and an exhale sent cold air running across his neck. Taking that as yet another form of acknowledgement by Haunter, Sam stood up, still trying and failing to make out the water in the stream. No matter what, we need to return to everyone else. They'll be waiting for us, even if they're the reason we're. Sam shook his head. Even if we don't bribe any Pokémon, that berry bread is dense enough to last for a few days. The important part is to conserve energy. But as long as we aren't too far away, we should last long enough to make it back. Sam was incredibly thankful to his mother. Before leaving on his journey, she had him go through a training camp for a few weeks. Without that, he wouldn't have known what to do or all the little tricks for surviving out here. His own experience on his journey helped as well. Without all of that knowledge and experience in his mind, he'd probably have been more freaked out. Finally feeling confident about their next steps, Sam turned back around to check on the source of the breathing, expecting to see Haunter. It wasn't Haunter. Eyes stared back. Eyes that were so incredibly familiar. For a second, it felt as though his heart had stopped. Sam had never been more terrified in his life. Before him, the floating Pokémon saw his fear and smiled, and it wasn't the expression of Haunter or any of the ghastly red eyes, rimmed with yellow, curved up with glee, and the ghost type let out a haunting giggle that echoed throughout the woods around them. With Sam frozen, the Pokémon bobbed in place, happy to have succeeded in its scare. The short dress of its body bounced alongside it, and the strands of hair on its head waved in an unseen wind. Mischievous! Sam whispered, his throat dry. The Pokémon saw his expression and suddenly rushed his face. She giggled in delight when Sam fell back. Mischievous was celebrating, laughing, cackling at a scare well done. She was a ghost type. A real ghost type. Nothing about her was fake, the world was far too cold right now for this to be an illusion. How? Sam breathed. The wild Pokémon, unaware of the depths of his question, simply stuck out her tongue in a cheeky taunt. Sam's brain wasn't working. His eyes felt like they weren't working. Yet, he couldn't ignore reality. What he was seeing was completely, undeniably, undoubtedly, true. That's Miss Drevis. My Miss Drevis. But she evolved. She's a Miss Magius. And she's traveled with me. She would know how to scare someone better than this. But it's her. I know it's her. It's not her sister or another Miss Drevis or any different Pokémon that just happens to look the same. It's her, and she scared me, and she... Sam swallowed a shaky breath. And she doesn't recognize me. His concept of reality was falling apart. Miss Drevis's smile was far too familiar. The way her eyes glimmered in delight was far too telling. He'd seen this exact expression plenty of times when they journeyed together. She was undeniably his Pokémon. But she also wasn't. Miss Drevis wasn't his Pokémon yet. How? Sam repeated. He didn't want to face the truth. Miss Drevis, his Miss Drevis, turned his way and cocked her head to the side in the equivalent of a shrug. She clearly thought he was asking how she scared him, but his question carried so much more meaning than that. Her appearance answered too many questions, and Sam finally had to admit to himself what had happened. That archway wasn't a portal. It hadn't just brought him deeper into the forest. The unexpected presence of night was too much of a gap. He had never actually fallen unconscious and had seen the seasons change around him. The presence of the unevolved Miss Drevis was too much of an impossibility. So all of that together combined into a single, undeniable fact. By being pushed through the archway, somehow, Sam had been sent backwards in time. He wasn't sure why Miss Drevis agreed to it. She didn't know him. She hadn't traveled with him. And Sam didn't actually know her. Yet, she had easily agreed when he asked for help. Miss Drevis spent only a single moment to consider it before moving up and down with an eager laugh. She almost immediately turned away to zip through the forest, but she stopped and turned toward him, impatiently waiting for him to catch up. She has so much energy. She's so young. She didn't have that passive sense of melancholy that Sam had seen her sometimes enter. This was a Miss Drevis that was new to life, one that was excited to experience new things. Honestly, Sam wouldn't have been surprised if she had come into being within the past year. He followed Miss Drevis, his Miss Drevis, and Haunter followed by his side. The much stronger, much more stealthy ghost type stuck to shadows but made sure to stay nearby. He was just as quiet as Sam. This, past version of their friend didn't notice him at all. Do you remember when Miss Drevis first came at us in the forest? How she looked so betrayed when we attacked her. Sam kept his voice to a whisper so that Miss Drevis didn't hear, and in the shadows of the great trees, Haunter responded with a tense nod. Do you think she recognized us? Silence persisted. Haunter thought about it. Back then, Miss Drevis recognized Sam. But now, Miss Drevis did not recognize him. Haunter, I don't think you're supposed to be here, Sam whispered slowly. I think Miss Magius did this on purpose. And Typhlosion must have known for a while. They wanted me to be here for a reason, but you... I'm sorry. Can you stay hidden? I don't think you should reveal yourself to her. Please. Just... I don't know. Can you stay on guard? Haunter looked conflicted. It was the most conflicted Sam had ever seen his Pokémon look. And even with that expression, Haunter kept sending glances Miss Drevis's way, and Sam knew why. She'd slipped past his attention. But she had slipped past his attention because he had unconsciously let her. He was too used to ignoring her presence to notice her before she approached Sam. Something about that stuck with Haunter, but he still nodded to accept Sam's request. For now, he faded into the nearby shadows and resumed his perimeter. Right after, Miss Drevis glanced behind her to check on Sam. She sent him a curious look. He replied with a smile, and Miss Drevis smiled back. In the end, she didn't bring him too far away from that steam. Maybe just a few trees over, but with how large these trees were, it was still quite the distance. She stopped in front of where a root bent upwards to curve out of the earth. Its arcing shape made Sam feel a bit sick at the unfortunate resemblance, but she eagerly dove into the gap made by its hump. Following her in, Sam had to crouch to fit under the root, but he could tell she had led him into some kind of short den. A flicker appeared in front of him, and just a foot away from his face, Miss Drevis strained with focus to conjure a single, ghostly light. Sam looked around. There were some neat rocks. A collection of colorful leaves. A pile of shredded yet stringy bark that could serve as a nest. And pressed against the wall was a mound of half-rotted berries. The smell was sickeningly sweet. Not needing food herself, Miss Drevis made a noise to offer Sam one of them, but he just forced back his grimace and shook his head. "Thank you, but I have food of my own," he said as he pulled out the berry bread. Miss Drevis saw and eyed it greedily. Sam eyed it as well. "Here." Though it was his only food, he couldn't say no to her, and he pulled off a tiny chunk to hand it over. Happily, Miss Drevis snapped up that small piece and chewed on the new flavor, making satisfied noises. Meanwhile, Sam tried to clear a space on the floor. He ignored how a bunch of creepy crawlies scattered away when he swiped his hand over before sitting down. Every ounce of his attention was on the ghost type in the room. She was his Pokémon, but she wasn't quite there yet. "How long have you lived here?" Miss Drevis shrugged again, unsure. Timekeeping didn't exactly seem to be her strength, as young as she was. However, Sam could tell this den had been the only place she called home. "Do you have any friends? Family? A trainer?" She tilted to the side before shaking her head. Miss Drevis was living alone. An awkward silence stretched out between them. Miss Drevis just seemed happy to be near Sam, excited but unsure how to interact with another being in her home. Meanwhile, Sam was doing his best to ignore his existential crisis, struggling to say anything that might be considered small talk. It was awkward. Uncomfortable. Unfortunate. Sam remembered just how sad she had looked when he and Haunter had attacked her back then. He couldn't imagine how long she spent alone, how long she was yet to spend alone before she properly joined them. "I have a team." He wasn't sure why he was talking about this. He didn't know what else to say. "I train Pokémon. A bunch of them. Ghost types. I'm a specialist with that type." Curious, Miss Drevis tilted her head. "Oh, I'm a trainer." Sam tried to explain. "Of Pokémon. They aren't here right now, but I work with them. We try to get strong. And, well, they're all ghost types like what you are." A ghost type. Pokémon can be defined by a bunch of different types of energy, and you're a ghost. Miss Drevis moved closer, intrigued, and Sam's chest hurt. This deep in the woods and alone as she was, she didn't exactly have a way to learn about this. Subtly, Sam glanced to her den's entrance to see eyes watching them. Haunter looked in. "Ghost types are spectral. Ethereal. They exist past the usual bounds of life and death," Sam said. "They can do things like phasing into shadows, conjuring darkness, and then they can also do far more esoteric stuff like laying curses or inflicting illusions. It's like," he paused. "That wisp you conjured. How much do you know about it?" Despite her eagerness to listen to his words, she'd also been focusing on maintaining that light. Sam looked it over. It was providing a dim, purple glow that let him just barely see the rest of the room. The wisp wasn't anything like a will-o-wisp or a hex, but it was still something the barest amount of pure ghost-type energy needed to start conjuring a shadow ball. "You could probably develop that into a move," Sam ended up saying. "Actually, I bet you already know a few moves, hey." Bringing up her chin, she replied with a proud nod. While she didn't seem familiar with the concept of trainers or the specifics of types, she still lived in the deep woods. "Out here, Pokémon had to know how to fight. My team knows a lot of moves. Shadow Ball, for starters, kind of like I said. We usually fight by using status moves to weaken our opponents, but my Pokémon also know a lot of really cool, more unique kinds of moves, like Double Team or Smokescreen or Agility or Shadow Sneak." Sam went quiet. He got distracted by talking about his Pokémon. He got the sense he shouldn't have been telling her about them. Yet, even as he went quiet, Miss Drevis looked up at him with an extreme amount of awe. He grimaced, but she was excited. The question she then asked him was like being punched in the gut. Miss Drevis wanted to know if he could teach her all of that, too. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I should have. I think I should sleep." Sam looked away, but Miss Drevis just nodded, understanding that other beings had to sleep at night. She moved back to give him room, and Sam laid down on the cramped dirt floor. "I messed up. I messed up so bad." He wasn't dumb. He could put the pieces together. After that conversation. Where did Mismagius send me? Misdreavus wanted him to teach her. She wanted to learn all those cool moves. Her moveset was likely not that expansive right now, but back when they first met, Misdreavus had known more than a wild Pokémon should have known, suspiciously so. His theory had been that she had a trainer in her past, but with him being here right now. It was me, wasn't it? Sam hated that realization. Forcing his eyes closed, Sam tried his best not to think about it. He tried not to consider what the implications would mean. It took much longer than he wanted, but he finally fell asleep. With how his schedule was shaping up, it was more of a nap than it was a night's rest, but it was at least something that let him briefly ignore everything that was on his mind. Eventually, light peeked into the short entrance to Misdreavus's home, and it woke Sam up. The sun was rising. There wasn't much illumination, but a scattering of sunbeams peeked through the canopy's dense leaves. Between the trees' branches, the barest hints of color were visible. Sam could just barely tell in which direction the sun was bringing itself through the sky. That let him know which way was east. Which meant he now knew the compass directions. Which meant, based on the map Chuck's wife had shown him, he had a general idea of which way he'd need to head to be brought back to civilization. Following that stream would definitely help, too. When I first entered the forest, Diana gave me this berry bread. Did she know something like this would happen? It's the only food I have. She mentioned it would ward off the voice of the forest, but now I'm thinking that wasn't the real reason. I think she gave it to me so I would have food in case of the worst. I bet she knows more. This situation was too impossible. Sam's only clue as to how this might have happened was from Diana's warning about the voice of the forest. Diana likely knew more than she shared, but she currently existed somewhere in the nebulous future. Sam had no idea how far back he was in the past. And he was also worried about making waves. He didn't want to do something like prevent his birth or prevent the capture of any of his team's Pokémon. But he wasn't even sure if that was possible. The past was the past. It should have already happened. If he was from the present or the future, all of this was already set. He was just living through it. Which maybe meant all of his actions were preordained, and that maybe, just maybe, meant that free will wasn't actually a thing. Or you know what? Let's not think about it. Existential crises aren't worth having so early in the morning. There was a bad taste in his mouth that he wouldn't be able to get rid of by brushing his teeth. He didn't have any supplies to help him get ready. Without anything else to do, Sam climbed out of the hole and did his best to try to find the sun. He could tell that Haunter was still nearby. The ghost type had stayed on guard all night. Sam could see his Pokémon dart through a gap between two roots, appearing as a moving shadow that briefly revealed his location. Haunter saw that he'd been noticed and sent Sam a thumbs up. Subtly, Sam sent back one of his own in reply. Then, behind him, Misdreavus was suddenly right there. She yawned as if she had been sleeping as well, but Sam knew that ghost types didn't need to sleep. She was just mimicking something he'd done when he first woke up in her home beneath the tree. "Good morning," he said, trying to push back his nerves. Misdreavus said her name to repeat the greeting and then looked at him with such hopeful eyes. "You want to know if I've given it any thought?" She nodded eagerly. She really wanted his advice. Unfortunately, Sam was unable to do anything but bite his lip and turn away. He tried his best to not think about what this meant and how much it hurt. But had to do so anyway. Misdreavus was doomed. She wasn't doomed to an early fate, but she was doomed to this time period in the past. After he had caught her in the future, she had never properly answered any questions about her history because why would she need to? After all, Sam would just experience all of it himself. He knew that her moveset hadn't been the moveset of a normal Misdreavus. She had to have been trained. Not just anyone in Johto was aware of Shadow Sneak. She also acted as though she had a trainer that she dearly missed. Sam hated it. He knew what that meant. The pieces were all there. It was obvious at this point. He'd been the one to train her. Or, he would be the one to train her. And then he would leave, and then she would spend an unknown amount of time trying to reunite with him. In a way, it was bittersweet, having the confirmation that he would find a way back but also the confirmation that he'd leave her behind. Misdreavus was doomed because she would be abandoned. She would be doomed to wander the forest after forming an attachment to him. And I can't stop it. It's a truth to her species. Misdreavus and Mismagius are known to get caught up in obsessions. Morty's Mismagius had an obsession with tea parties, and Misdreavus's obsession will be with me. Those hopeful eyes continued to stare up at him. Even if he ran now, it wouldn't work. He had already caught her interest. Worse, he also knew he wouldn't be able to say no. He couldn't just leave his Pokémon behind. So, in that moment, Sam made a promise, swearing something to both her and to himself. No matter what, he'd search for a way to stop that abandonment. He'd find a way to make sure Misdreavus would never have to spend ages searching for someone who wasn't there. The past was set in stone? Not while he could do something about it. He would find out who or what was responsible for this, the supposed voice of the forest, most likely, and then he would wring their neck until they agreed to help. He'd fix this, but in the meantime, he'd do whatever he could. If Misdreavus was doomed to be miserable, then he'd do everything in his power to make sure she would be happy right now. The past was the past, but the future could change. What happened would still happen, but Sam was in a position to change what tomorrow would bring. He would fix this. Somehow. He would make this all work. "I'll train you," Sam ended up saying. And right away, Misdreavus excitedly pulled up in the air, bouncing in place with glee. Sam's basic plan wouldn't change. He'd follow the stream back to civilization, hopefully reaching Arbaville. He was yet to visit the town, but Diana would be from there. She'd known about the voice of the forest, which meant other people stood to know as well. So he ignored the sour taste in his mouth and the tension he felt in his chest. With the promise he made, Misdreavus would be coming with him. He'd do everything he could to find out more while simultaneously training her. He would make sure she had the time of her life, and then he'd make sure to find a solution. He would make things better. Sam swore he would find that cursed voice of the forest, and no matter what, he'd force it to help. Chapter 145. The best trainers, as in the peak of the peak, could take an inexperienced Pokémon and turn them into an elite-level fighter within only a few months. Sam could not do that. However, he was still someone with almost a full season of experience behind him, and he had a massive pool of knowledge to draw from. Just because he couldn't bring a Pokémon to an elite level in a short time didn't mean he was clueless about how to help Misdreavus. He was no longer the trainer who struggled to put together a training plan. He knew what exercises she would need to do as well as how to best describe new moves to help her learn them. He was a Pokémon trainer. A proper one. He couldn't call himself weak. He knew for a fact that he'd be able to help. So, Misdreavus. Sam clapped his hands together, facing her that same morning at the edge of the stream. The flow of the water made it obvious in which direction he'd need to travel to find the river, or at least, Sam hoped it did. "I want to see what moves you know. Show me what you've picked up on your own." Locking eyes with him, Misdreavus did her best to reply with a firm nod before going on to demonstrate her moves. She was cute. Overall, her selection was pretty basic for a wild ghost type, consisting of Growl and Confuse Ray for support, and then Psy-Wave, Astonish, and Confusion for attacks. Sam rubbed his chin. Misdreavus looked on hopefully. All of her attacks are decent, but she doesn't have anything that strong. At most, they're functional, but she's not exactly using them that fast or giving them the power they need to deal damage. "Let me guess," Sam said, "for a lot of these, you spied on other Pokémon and then copied what they could do, right?" As he tapped his cheek in thought, Misdreavus gained a slight blush. "All right. So that's how she knows these moves. She just needs to practice and expand her choices, then. In a battle, you need options. You also need to make sure those options actually work," Sam said, bringing his hands behind his back and beginning to pace. "By that, I don't just mean moves you've used once or twice. I mean that to win battles, you need to use the moves that will actually hit. You need to use moves whose effects will actually apply." He stopped walking, pushing his feet together as he looked over to where Misdreavus floated in the air. Curiously, she tilted herself to the side, but there was a tinge of disappointment to her. Sam realized she'd been hoping for compliments after her demonstration. "Okay, yeah, it's pretty great that you're already so familiar with the psychic type," Sam said, causing Misdreavus to puff up in pride. "We can use that, and I noticed a few ways you get even better. Since we want you to improve." He looked around. No one else was there. This was the first time he'd be training a Pokémon without any other Pokémon to help, so he decided to take a risk. Throwing his arms out to the sides, Sam made himself into the widest target he could be. "Hit me. Use Psy-Wave." Immediately, Misdreavus dropped her jaw, aghast. Scaring someone was one thing, but directly attacking them was another. In the wild, fights and moves were only really exchanged during moments of actual aggression or to claim territory. Using one on a companion wasn't uncommon, but that was for Pokémon. Humans weren't known for being able to take the same level of hits. Trust me. I won't get hurt, but I need you to see this with your own eyes. Sam knew that Haunter would help him dodge in the worst case, but he also didn't have any other targets that Misdreavus could attack. She was hesitant at first, shaking her head in an attempt to deny Sam's request. However, Sam just kept up his expectant stare, and she eventually grimaced before finding her resolution, breathing in, and then closing her eyes to focus. Unlike most of the time Sam had seen his Pokémon attack, he couldn't see Misdreavus's move form right away. She was far more inexperienced than he'd thought. Still, soon enough, ripples formed in the air as her control of psychic-type energy let her manipulate the space ahead of her. A few seconds longer, and she then snapped her eyes open. Her Psywave properly took form alongside a shout, creating a blue-pink wave that oscillated through the air to reach Sam. He dodged it by taking a single step to the right. Okay. That was pretty good. Like I said, knowing more than just normal and ghost-type moves is great for a Pokémon at your level. Misdreavus responded with a huff. The move came naturally to her. His compliment didn't mean much right now. Then let's skip straight to the advice, Sam said. No compliment sandwich. I'll keep it straight and to the point. Is that okay with you? She nodded. Sam once more took up the stance of a proper lecturer or a drill instructor. He might have been enjoying this a bit too much. No matter what, he'd need to travel to find a way back to his team, but practicing with Misdreavus was nostalgic and helped keep unwanted thoughts out of his mind. First things first, never close your eyes, Sam started. Throughout that entire process, I could have walked away while you weren't paying attention to me, and that would have completely thrown off your aim. Briefly, shame passed over Misdreavus's face, but that disappeared when she realized Sam wasn't criticizing her, just giving her advice. Secondly, you don't need to pay that much attention to your form. Moves will be disrupted when they hit no matter what, so at the base level, they only need to be functional enough to be first used. But that just brings me to my third point: your moves don't need to be perfect. Just usable. You're only just starting. That's how I trained all of my Pokémon, Sam said, continuing. We learned the basics of their moves at first, and then we tried to make them better. Build a solid foundation before you perfect it. And if you have a solid foundation, then you can modify it later on, right? Misdreavus listened with rapt attention, eagerly nodding her head along every word. Truthfully, Sam didn't remember her exact moveset from when he caught her. He knew he had it written down in his journal, but his journal was. Don't think about that, Sam. Just think about helping the Pokémon in front of you. Alright. Try again, he said, voice soft. Keep in mind my advice and use Psywave one more time. Once more, Sam held out his arms, and once more, Misdreavus looked hesitant. But Sam had already shown that he could dodge, and she was quicker to focus this time, without closing her eyes. When she used Psywave here, those same ripples appeared, but only after several long seconds where nothing happened. Closing her eyes had helped her focus before. However, she was still able to form the move, just with a bit more effort. Space vibrated, and then her attack took form. Briefly, Sam's eyes widened when he realized this less controlled version of her attack was rushing him faster than he'd be able to dodge. Shoot! Haunter saved him. Hands left Sam's shadow to grab his feet and slide him to the left. The Psywave continued past him with an uneven speed before hitting the bark of a tree, landing with a heavy thunk. That would have hurt, Sam whispered, staring at where Misdreavus's move had just hit. Misdreavus, meanwhile, didn't seem to care. She didn't even notice that Sam had moved unnaturally, she was just worried that she had almost hurt him. Inherently, Psywave varied in its power due to the wave-like structure of the move. When she used it with less preparation, there was less control. They'd just been unlucky enough to see its power overflow and hit its maximum. No. Don't get worried. You're already doing great. Did you see how quickly that formed once you got started? Already, it's way better to use in a fight. Misdreavus froze, hearing what Sam said and now truly realizing what she had done. Slowly, she turned to the bark of the tree to see the impact her move had made. Already, that slight improvement had seen parts of the bark splinter. Good job, Sam said. She smiled at him. And then she fell. Jumping to reach her, Sam just barely managed to catch Mischievous before she hit the ground due to exhaustion settling her. As impressive as her move was, it was uncontrolled and saw so much of her energy be drained in its untrained use. But it had been effective. At least, she was now safe in Sam's arms. And Sam could carry her to let her rest as he finally began following the stream south. Together with Mischievous, Sam walked alongside that stream. The water flowed and bubbled, and at several points, he had to move far off to the side to hide from the wild Pokémon that drank from it. Haunter always gave Sam a warning, but it was a bit nerve-wracking to see the strong wild Pokémon out here. If more of his team had been around, he wouldn't have been as worried as he was, but as skilled as Haunter was, being outnumbered would always pose a risk. As Sam had seen previously, a herd of Stantler could use illusions to mislead both him and Haunter. Apom were menaces in general and great at tricks that could nab what little food Sam had. Additionally, any bug types could swarm and Sam still had nightmares about his challenge in Azalea's gym. Mischievous could technically help Sam face anything that attacked, but she was too busy going through cycles of practicing and then slowly following along in rest at Sam's side. But regardless of any threats in the environment, Sam managed to follow the flow of water safely and without any attacks. Mischievous practiced freely, and Sam did everything he could to help her train her moves. Days passed. Mischievous showed a surprising amount of improvement as Sam continued to make his way south. Her Psywave quickly became her best attack, turning into a pulse of energy that moved strangely enough to disrupt any foe. Her control over Psywave also bled into her confusion, which she practiced by telekinetically carrying small stones at her side. As for Growl, that was just a matter of projecting her voice, and her Confuse Ray was a move she used to inflict illusions on Sam whenever he stopped to take a break. But the biggest thing he wanted her to learn was more ghost-type attacks. Thankfully, she was already familiar with the energy due to her type and her experience with Astonish. With that, Sam was able to guide her through the process of building and releasing her energy in an area around her. That meant she knew Nightshade, as weak as it was. It was a simple move, only requiring raw control, but it was also a great way to track just how much she grew. Over the few days Sam spent training with her, Mischievous started with only being able to conjure a faint haze, but she was able to develop that into a shroud that made her appear as nothing more than a silhouette. It wasn't quite the sphere of darkness Sam was used to, but she was getting there. And then there were her next steps. For Shadow Ball, Sam would explain to her, you basically want to take that same energy and condense it into a singular attack. Instead of having it suffuse the space around you, you bring it into a ball. The best way I've seen Pokémon describe it is that the start doesn't feel too dissimilar to something like Astonish. She would try and fail, but every attempt at least helped her develop her control. Sam also said nothing when she closed her eyes. Doing so would be a mistake in battle, but it helped her focus right now. The importance was getting the basics down first and then improving it from there. Though she didn't pick up Shadow Ball, Sam did notice flickers. Nothing proper ever formed, but the way her ghost-type energy moved reminded him of wisps. Wisps that would be key to the attacks she'd eventually pick up in the future. Other than that, the only other move he had her pick up was Mean Look, because of course he did. Why would Sam ever pass up the chance to further his core strategy? When ghost-type energy was involved, it didn't take much more than a glare to lock a target in place, especially since Mischievous already knew how to inflict mental effects with Confuse Ray. It was by no means battle-ready, but she could certainly use the move. Sam even had her test it out on a few wild Pokémon that got too close. They would freeze and allow Sam to run away, and then Mischievous would rush off to catch up right after. Frequently, she'd giggle the whole way. You know, Sam said one night as they rested under the stars. You're growing strong, Mischievous, and I can't even say it's due to myself. You're just a hard worker. You're determined. Without your enthusiasm, you would have never gotten anywhere as far as you are now. Mischievous would laugh a lot. There was a happiness to her that Sam hadn't seen before. At times, she would randomly fling herself in the air just to feel the wind rushing past her, and then Sam would scramble to catch her in his arms. He didn't have a Pokeball. He didn't have a way to help her rest. Yet, she would let herself become physical enough for him to carry her. That was how she'd rest to recover over the course of the day. You're also, Sam wasn't sure how to phrase this. His voice drifted off. The thought hurt to think, but it would be worse to not say. You're also so much like one of my Pokémon. Incredibly so. It's just. I don't know. She put all this hard work into becoming a powerful special attacker, yet she never told me. She was more lonely than I realized. After letting out a soft noise, Miss Drevis pressed herself against Sam's side. He found himself leaning against her. And he wasn't sure why she was so attached to him even though just a few days had passed. Had she really been that alone? It made the moment she re-encountered him in the forest feel that much worse, and a certain phrase echoed through his mind. Ghosts attracted ghosts. Thank you. Sam ended up saying. I'm sorry. I should have come sooner. She made a noise as if to say it was fine because he didn't know, but that wasn't true. It was Miss Drevis who didn't realize the truth. But their travels continued, and their training sessions progressed. The stream slowly grew, never quite becoming a river but definitely becoming a brook. Without supplies, Sam did his best to take care of himself in that time, using whatever he could to keep himself fit. Having a source of clean, fresh water helped a lot, and Haunter also assisted by slipping off and returning with berries. Eating them made the bread last longer. Sam never asked what Haunter had to do to get them. Without a proper source of food, Sam did find himself growing tired. He knew this trip wasn't something he could keep up forever. He needed to find civilization sooner rather than later, not just to find a way to reunite with his team but also to have the chance to eat a good meal. And then it happened. The further south they got, the shorter the trees became. When Sam passed by one to exit into an open meadow, he froze out of recognition. I know this place. Before him, grasses and flowers spread out in a meadow, and a mass of Pokémon danced under the sun. It was almost the same as it would be years in the future. He could see so many Blossom and Oddish living in this place. I passed by this place with my team, Sam said to Miss Drevis, but also to Haunter. There should be a road just up ahead. That means if I'm remembering correctly, there's a stream. He stopped what he was doing to desperately look around, and then he took off in a dash. Miss Drevis shouted out as Sam chased toward where his memories took him. Yes. I was right. It changed over time, but that's definitely where those Meryl were playing. That means the road is just up ahead, and if the road really is right there. The campsite. My team might be here. What if he and Haunter hadn't been the only ones to fall in? A flicker of hope entered his chest. Sam charged through the woods, running toward where he had been at rest with his team. He had no clue how time had been passing for both him and them. Was there a difference? Was a day here a day then? Or was no time passing at all, and he'd only return once all of this was over? But it wouldn't matter if at least one of them were here. If a single other Pokémon had somehow been sent through time, then it wouldn't just be him and Haunter trying to get back. He followed the trail. He followed the memories of his footsteps. There was no sign that he had walked this path, but that made sense. He hadn't technically been here yet. The forest exploded before him, opening up into that tiny grove he and his team had once taken a break. The same sparse few beams of light peeked through, and Sam searched for any sign of his friends. Except... No, Sam breathed. There's nothing. It was empty. The only thing he recognized was that root he had used as a bench, but it was significantly smaller than it was before. It hadn't grown yet. I hoped. I just thought. It was barely big enough to serve as a seat, but Sam sat on it anyway. He dropped his head into his hands. He felt a pressure on his knee. The presence of Haunter's hand helped. It was a reminder that he wasn't alone. From behind them, Miss Drevis finally caught up, chasing after him into the empty clearing and moving over to Sam. She made a worried noise. Sam sighed, brought his head back up, and forced a smile onto his face. I'm fine. Sorry. I didn't mean to run. I just got separated from my team here, and I thought. I don't know. I thought they'd be here. Even if it didn't make sense. But they weren't. We're alone. Miss Drevis said her name to try to say that she was here, and there was something about that made Sam feel even worse. But it's fine, he said, wiping his eyes. I know where we are now. We'll follow that path to head back to the river. Arbaville can't be that far south. Arbaville was an old town. He had no doubts it'd be around, even whenever it currently was in the past. If he could just speak to someone knowledgeable about local myths, he could learn more. They'd either have advice, or they'd have information on whatever that cursed voice of the forest was. When I find that voice. A dark look overtook his face. Come on, Sam said, taking a deep breath to stabilize himself. Getting stuck here isn't going to help. It's fine to have a few negative thoughts, but they're not worth getting trapped in. Miss Drevis nodded slowly. She looked as though she didn't quite believe him. Sam ignored her worried stare as well as the one Haunter sent him from the shadows. Standing up from that same route, Sam was prepared to leave. Unfortunately, neither his pack nor the new Pokédex was where he'd left them or would leave them, in an unknown amount of time. He'd truly need to carry on as he was, with just Miss Drevis and Haunter at his side. But as he readied himself to head out, he heard something else in the distance. Not the cry of the voice of the forest, but the cry of two voices from people getting close. Are you sure we couldn't stay in the meadow? I'm sure. We've already delayed this long enough. But I wanted a sketch of a Blossom. It's fine. You have plenty of sketches of Blossom. I want to get deeper in and look. I was right, there's a clearing ahead. Sam went still as a set of nearby bushes shook, and two young boys almost immediately popped out right after. Having shoved their way through the foliage, they fell to the earth when the resistance suddenly disappeared. One clutched a leather-bound journal close to his chest, and the other hit the floor only to laugh and roll onto his back. See? Told ya, Sammy. A clearing. This'll be a better place to rest before moving on. I guess so. But we could have rested near the Blossom. PSH. We're going to see so many more rare Pokémon if we head deeper in. Plus, you could just sketch. The boy's voice trailed off when he saw Sam standing in front of him. Immediately, the boy scrambled to his feet and sent Sam a hostile glare. His gaze was almost murderous, and Sam had no clue what he'd done to deserve that. The other one, Sammy, weirdly enough continued to clutch his journal while pushing back to his feet, pausing momentarily to brush dirt off of his baggy pants. He froze as well when he saw Sam there, but instead of any hostile gaze, he kept a kind smile on his face and greeted him politely. Oh, hello. Sorry, we didn't know someone else was already here. Do you mind if we stay for a bit? You can call me Sammy, and this is he froze when he saw the Pokémon behind Sam. You have a Miss Drevis? Yes. Sam said. Immediately, the similarly named Sammy pulled a pencil out of the front pocket of his shirt and began drawing in his journal. Shy, Miss Drevis moved to hide behind Sam, but the situation failed to progress from there when the other boy held out an arm to get Sammy to stop. Wait. Look how ragged he is. We don't know if he's a threat. A threat? You're kidding, right? He's not ragged, he's just hold on, do you need help? The look he sent Sam was one of worry, carrying a promise of help. Meanwhile, the look from the other boy was one of hate, seemingly carrying a promise of pain. Sam's throat felt sore. Honestly, the world seemed as though it was spinning. He couldn't find the courage to talk. Why? Because Sam recognized them. He had seen the faces of these two boys before. You too. You are. Memories flashed through his head of a certain photograph he'd once glimpsed in his attic. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, but it felt so important right now. They might have been older in it, but the resemblance was clear enough. When Sam failed to speak, the unnamed boy stormed forward. Ignoring Miss Drevis's yelp of surprise, he grabbed Sam's arm to drag him to the side. His whisper came out more like a hiss. Who are you supposed to be? You aren't supposed to be here. Doesn't matter. Leave. I set up too much to fail now. Please. I need to make this work. Sam gaped at just how hostile the boy's voice was, but he still didn't say anything. However, this time around, it was simply because someone else butted in. Hey, don't speak to him like that. Sammy shouted as he charged forward. What's with you? I've never seen you act like this. You didn't even introduce yourself. Blink. Finally, the other boy backed off. Sighing, his hostile gaze dropped, and he brought a hand through his hair in a show of his utmost confidence. Fine. Whatever. I guess I might have been overreacting, but so what? As for my name, he grinned. Call me Dick. Or Richard. Or just Rich. I'm Richard Greyson. Yeah, I can tell you recognize it. It's purposeful. And I expect you to remember that. Chapter 146. The offer of real food distracted Sam from his thoughts, and he didn't hesitate to take it. He was given a bowl of what he had to call powdered gruel. It thickened once it was mixed with water, and then a few sprinkles of spices were stirred in. The meal wasn't anything special, it wasn't even like any of those pre-made travel meals sold at Pokemarts. It had the consistency of breakfast but somehow had the flavors of lunch. However, after surviving off of nothing but berry bread and Haunter's scavenged berries, Sam thought it was delicious. He devoured it. As he finished inhaling the last bite, a voice spoke up next to him. "So, what brought you to this forest?" When he heard the question, Sam almost choked. He looked up at the boy seated there only to see narrowed eyes and a gaze that met his own. It was harsh. Aggressive. It lacked even the slightest amount of trust. Honestly, Sam was hurt by that glare more than anything they could have said. Slowly swallowing that last little bit of food, Sam glanced around for help, but Haunter was too busy keeping an eye out for intruders, and Miss Drevis was shyly floating in the air a short distance away to allow that Sammy kid to record her appearance in a sketch. "I wandered here," Sam ended up saying as he rotated the empty bowl in his hands. "I just found myself in the forest one day." Miss Drevis helped, but... Likely story. His interrogator leaned back and crossed their arms. "Let's say I don't believe you. Instead, tell me where you're from." It was an order, not a question. There was no room for maneuvering. Sam didn't want to speak of it, but given just who was asking. "I had a family," he said, breathing out. "I was with all of my friends. We just wanted to see the world together, and then I was suddenly falling through the arch." He hesitated to say the next part. "I was pushed in," he added in a whisper. As he finished his explanation, something about his interrogator's gaze shifted. Familiarity? Not just that. It's like he went through a similar experience. Briefly, it seemed as though the kid understood exactly what Sam had gone through, but that look quickly disappeared. "Ugh. I see," the kid said, his brow creasing in a line. "You didn't even mean to be here." "Humph. I think I understand." "You don't. You don't understand the half of it." Sam searched the younger version of his grandfather, desperately trying to find anything that might have been recognition, but there was nothing. This kid was just a kid. He was Sam's grandfather, but Sam hadn't been born. He wasn't Sam's grandfather yet. "Richard Greyson," Sam said, repeating the name of the man he so looked up to. "Richard," the kid responded with a simple raise of an eyebrow. "I think I knew someone named that," Sam continued. Sam was met with a smile. "Yeah. I hope you do," Richard said. "I told you, the name was intentional." Sam didn't understand what that meant. But... It really seems like this is just a coincidence. A weird coincidence, but maybe not depending on what's involved. Richard tapped a fist against his chin. "Fine. I'll accept your story. And as an apology, go ahead to prove myself, I'll answer any question you ask me." Sam opened his mouth, closed it, and then looked his grandfather in the eye. Except, he didn't do that. Sam looked the unfamiliar boy in the eye. "Why are you in the forest?" Sam asked. A smirk briefly flashed across the kid's face before vanishing as if it had never been there. "Really? Can't figure that out? Well, that's fine. Sammy over there wants to see as many new Pokémon as possible, and since we've been traveling together, I went along with his plan to come here." "You've been traveling together?" Sam asked, blinking. "With Sammy? Sammy? Hold on. Who is he, anyway?" As Sam sent Richard a confused look, Richard sent a nearly identical confused look right back. "You don't know? Wait, you didn't see he stopped himself. He's just a friend. He helped me. And he..." Before continuing, he paused and cocked his head to the side, looking at Sam while mumbling something about him lacking culture under his breath. "Yeah, we've been traveling together for a while, ever since I got started over in Celadon." He'd already been traveling for a while, but he helped me get my bearings, catch a Pokémon, and take on the local gym, Richard explained. "Except... It wasn't what I expected." His shoulders shifted down ever so slightly. It took a moment for Sam to figure out what he wanted to ask next. "How so?" Richard blinked as if he had forgotten Sam was there. He almost seemed to rush to sit back up and correct that slight slump. There was the barest hint of reservation to him before he spoke next. For a second, Sam almost got the sense that Richard hardly believed the words about to leave his mouth. "It's the war," he said. "The war," Sam repeated. He'd heard it mentioned once or twice in the past, but people didn't like talking about it for some reason. Okay, it's not actually a war, at least not yet," Richard explained. "Think of it more like a Cold War with a huge amount of posturing. Kanto and Johto hate each other. They're constantly trying to show that they're stronger. There's not really any fighting save for independent battles along the border, but is that an issue? If it's just a few fights, it's totally a region's duty to make sure their trainers stand at the top, right?" "Sure," Sam offered. "So," Richard leaned back, and his mouth pinched into an unhappy frown. "The gym challenge is the real problematic part of this. It wasn't what I expected. Like, if you go through the traditional route of pewter gym and onwards, your journey is going to be pretty standard. Except, if you go anywhere else first, those gym leaders won't have the appropriate teams. With everything going on, all people care about right now is being the strongest. It wasn't what I expected. It's like... I don't know. It's like where? Ugh. Everyone only cares about themselves." Richard cast his gaze to the forest floor, and Sam could tell there was plenty of baggage there. Despite being a ghost-type specialist, he wasn't the biggest history nerd. He knew the gist of things when it came to the past, but most of his historical knowledge came from stories and myths. What he did know was that the gym challenge, or at least an equivalent to it, was something that had existed for a long time, essentially since the founding of Kanto. He had known his grandfather had participated in it, but he had never known to what extent or what the world's general situation was during it. "How strong was her team?" Sam asked. Richard looked up, surprised to hear Sam talking again. "Her team? Oh, you mean the Celadon gym leader? Somewhere around a 4th or 5th badge level. I just had EV, so the outcome." He shrugged and returned to his thoughts. After that, Sam remained silent. There was a storm brewing in his gut. He wasn't sure if he could stomach any more questions, especially since reality was settling in now that he'd eaten. His chest hurt. His throat hurt. His grandfather was alive before him, and yet... He doesn't know me. I don't know him. There are all these little details that he's sharing that I didn't know. Apparently, his grandfather had an EV. He'd never told Sam about an EV. Then again, he'd always been reluctant to speak about most of the Pokémon he'd raised. By the time Sam was born, his grandfather had already retired and had sent most of his team members to caretakers and other trainers. There, they could either enjoy a comfortable retirement or continue chasing their dreams in an active circuit. But the truth was that most had already passed away. The main reason his grandfather's Typhlosion was still around was because that Typhlosion had been one of his grandfather's final captures. His first Pokémon and his oldest Pokémon hadn't been around for a reason back when Sam was growing up. I never knew the exact details, but I also didn't like to ask. He would always get this look on his face whenever they were brought up. I didn't want to make him sad. I think that might have been one of the reasons I started to like the ghost type in the first place. I'd always enjoyed scary stories, but I also didn't want to train a team that'd eventually leave me. Richard had already drifted off into thought, and Sam realized they'd both been sitting in silence. Placing the empty bowl down, he looked over the boy sitting before him. It hit him then that he was truly decades in the past. As he stared, Richard also looked up, acting as if he expected Sam to ask another question, but Sam didn't say anything. Instead, he looked past him to where a certain Pokémon floated in the air. Miss Drevis was still not making eye contact, but she had taken up a slight pose as if she wanted the other boy to get her best side. Decades. She really waited that long just for me? Sam's chest didn't just hurt. He felt as though his entire body was in pain. You all right? He then blinked, realizing his grandpa Richard was now sending him a curious look. Oh. Yeah. Sorry. I get it. Richard snapped his fingers. You're curious about Sammy, right? Sure. I'm curious about Sammy, Sam lied. It was only a half lie, though. The other boy was an enigma. Never once had Sam heard his grandfather mention him. Both he and Sammy shared a name, just like how Sam shared a name with another unmentionable person. Yet, as the barest hint of that thought entered his mind, he refused to think it. There was no way he'd allow himself to make that connection. Distracted by that, he missed the smug grin on Richard's face until Richard had already stood up. As he moved past him, Richard sent Sam a friendly smack on the shoulder. Go ahead and chat. You're no threat. He's worth getting to know, but Sam. Richard leaned in for a whisper. Don't mess this up. He then sent Sam one last smile, giving him another friendly shake on the arm. As he walked away, Sam heard him mumble something about needing to check in with his Jolteon, and then Richard pulled out a grey, metal sphere to twist a red knob on its top. Hey, Jolt! Need your help again. Just gimme a moment to take it out. Richard's Jolteon coalesced from light like any other Pokémon released from a Pokeball. As he moved behind a nearby tree, it was already causing sparks to crackle off of its fur out of eagerness, and it practically bounced around his feet. Briefly, Sam swore he caught the briefest hint of some kind of cord, but the other boy was gone before he could give it a proper look. With Richard having stepped away, Sam was now alone mostly. Haunter had returned to his shadow when everyone was distracted, and then Mischievous and the artist were still there. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, Sam stood, recognizing he didn't want to put this off. And, despite being so focused on his work, the other boy, Sammy, was still aware enough of his surroundings to notice Sam's approach. Oh, hey! I hope you got your fill. We have more of those meals if you need more. Thank you, but I'm fine, Sam said. I hope it wasn't too bad. It was all right. Actually, it was pretty good. The boy snorted in amusement and pointed at Sam with his pencil. Sorry, but I'm going to doubt you on that. Those meals are awful. I haven't heard anyone compliment them before, but I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm sorry we didn't have anything else, but I guess being in the forest for a few days has to make any meal taste good. He smiled and waited for Sam to continue the conversation, but he went back to drawing when it became clear Sam had nothing more to say. Sam still felt a bit dizzy after everything he'd learned, so he chose to sit on the forest floor next to the boy, wanting to be near Mischievous. The boy attempted to stand to offer Sam his seat, but Sam just politely declined and remained on the forest floor. From where he sat, Sam was in the perfect position to watch the other boy continue his surprisingly detailed sketch of Mischievous. The drawing wasn't a perfect copy, but it contained all the little details that let Sam know the image was definitely of her. However, when Mischievous noticed Sam had walked over, she suddenly gained a beautiful smile, and Sammy held back a gasp as he flipped to a new page just to try to capture that brief moment of delight. Silence persisted. Sam's thoughts were deafening. When faced with the choice to reflect on what he learned or to say something, Sam chose to speak. Do you like Pokémon? He ended up asking. He then immediately cursed himself and his stupid little question. If Reedy was here, she would have started an actual conversation, but he just had to open his dumb mouth and answer the most basic thing possible. He really wished he was still with his team right now. I love Pokémon, the boy answered, not even blinking at what Sam said. They're why I'm out here. I want to learn as much as I can about them. Honestly, living this kind of life is living out my dream. The boy quietly laughed to himself before going back to work. Sam could see just how much effort he was putting into it. All he had was a pencil and a blank sheet of paper, yet the kid was doing his utmost to capture the most perfect image of Mischievous he could. No camera? Sam asked. Cameras cost too much. There's also something impersonal about them, the kid said. So if you're sketching and studying Pokémon, do you have a Pokédex? Pokédexes had been around for years, for at least the past century. Even if Sam was truly this far back in the past, people would still have the written Pokédex. And then there was also the question of the new Pokédex, but as much as the sketches reminded Sam of it, it seemed unrelated to what Sammy was drawing. I don't. I can't afford one, Sammy answered, taking Sam's question in stride and just seeming to be happy to speak about his work. Pokédexes are almost as expensive as cameras. I make do with what information I can find on my own, but I mostly get it from word of mouth. Rich is a great help, too, but I think I'm a bit selfish when it comes to him. He tries too hard to give me advice. Research is fun. Sometimes, listening to him almost feels like cheating. The kid sent Sam a smile, and Sam could tell none of his questions had been dumb. Truly, Sammy loved Pokémon with all his heart. If his words didn't prove it enough, then Sam could see that in just how much effort he was putting into the sketch of Mischievous. He didn't know her at all, yet he was pouring himself into it. But Sam wasn't here to talk to the kid. Sam was here for someone else. Throughout this whole conversation, Misdreavus had been trying to subtly approach Sam through the air, moving with a slight, constant drift. Ever so slowly, she'd been inching toward where Sam sat. However, the moment she noticed Sam's attention was wholly back on her, she used that moment to lunge. She widened her eyes as far as they could go and stuck her tongue out in an attempt at a scare. Unfortunately for her, Sam saw it coming, and he'd had it worse in the past. Still, he pretended she got him, and he purposefully fell back just to hear her laugh. "Come on," he whined. "Don't laugh, you didn't get me that bad." She cackled, and the sound of her laughter made him smile. He started laughing pretty quickly alongside her, too. "Okay, okay. I've ignored you for long enough. Since we're just sitting here, do you want to train a bit more?" She nodded eagerly, and Sam pushed to his feet, pausing slightly when he realized Sammy was staring. "Oh. Sorry. I know I haven't really explained anything after you offered me that meal, but we can at least." "No, it's fine. Train your Misdreavus. I'll just be here. I'm waiting for Richard, anyway. I like to sketch, so you don't need to worry about me." Sammy's smile was bright, and Sam nodded slightly, not sure what else to say. He just stepped back a bit to make some room and then gestured for Misdreavus to move closer to him through the air. "All right. We're going to keep working on Shadow Ball. Remember, all you need to do is collect your energy. Don't worry about the shape, just keep it together. As long as it's all attached, the ball part will come naturally, so it's the shadow part we need to work on, yet." She sent him a firm nod, and then both of them pulled back. Facing outwards into the forest, she pulled up into the air and waited for Sam's command. "Show me what you can do, Misdreavus. Use Shadow Ball." She shouted her name, the noise echoed around them, and then a mass of shadows collected in front of her face. The air flickered. A few wisps appeared, but most sputtered out. Something that resembled a half-inflated balloon floated forward, but then it flopped to the ground and burst into a rapidly fading puddle of purple and black. Misdreavus fell a full foot in the air. "It's fine." That was already a massive improvement. "Compared to only being able to make a weak nightshade, I can tell you're growing fast." A blush overtook her face, and then Sam laughed. Seeing that reaction, she cried out her name, doing her best to complain about how mean he was being. "Got it." But they both paused when Sammy suddenly spoke up. "Excuse me." The kid looked up from his book with a slight, cheeky grin on his face. Sammy hadn't actually been paying attention to any of that. Glancing between the two of them, he grinned and then turned his book around. Sam had to hold back tears when he saw what it was, and Misdreavus went completely still in the air. The sketch displayed on the page was of the two of them, but neither were training. It was a perfect capture of them at the very beginning, when they had both laughed after Misdreavus's scare. "Do you want it?" Sammy asked. Here. It's easy to tear out. I can put more pages in later, anyway." Sammy pulled the sketch out and held it out. Sam cautiously took it into his hands. He wasn't sure what to do with it. Misdreavus seemed unable to look away. He was eventually snapped out of it when Haunter nudged his feet to remind him of everyone nearby. "Hey? Oh, yeah, by the way." Sam looked up from the paper and folded it into his pocket. "I never introduced myself. My name is Sam, but yours is Sammy. Do you have a last name or anything else I could call you by? Not that I'm trying to take your name, it's just that." Sammy let out a short laugh. "It's fine. I used to go by Sam as well, but Rich called me Sammy, and that kind of stuck. But I guess if you really want a different name to call me by, just use my last name. It's..." He then froze, head snapping up to stare out into the woods. Haunter had detected nothing. Sam had detected nothing. But there was something out there that had made Sammy go on high alert. "Do you hear that?" Sammy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's like a shout. Or some kind of cry." "The voice of the forest," Sam breathed. "We were warned about that when we first headed in," Sammy mumbled. Sam strained his ears to try to hear that same, cursed cry, but he couldn't hear anything, at least at first. It started out ever so faint, but it grew in volume over time. The noise was familiar to Sam. He had heard it once before. But back then, he had been falling, and it had sounded distant, muffled, and faint. Now? It was like he could suddenly hear clearly for the first time. Hey! What's going on? Everything suddenly turned quiet. Richard walked out from behind his tree, returning his Jolteon and shoving something back into his pocket. However, his appearance marked a new development in these events. The bushes to their clearings north suddenly started to rustle. Everyone froze, expecting something to burst out. It was not a single Pokémon. A full-on stampede charged out, and dozens of small Pokémon exploded into the clearing. Sammy yelped, jumping back to press himself against a tree, and Sam dropped to the ground to try to use that root as cover. Richard's position let him just barely avoid the horde, but he still stumbled backwards as the pinks and blues of Nidoran rushed past them, and many Rattata and Centaurette ran along their sides. What's going on? Sam shouted. He could barely see from where that root covered his side on the ground. Thankfully, Haunter helped from the shadows to redirect the few Pokémon that missed their jump. None landed on Sam, and then, without anyone noticing, it was over. Mostly. There's more, Sammy whispered. Sam brought his head up to stare out toward where the wild Pokémon had just fled. He expected to see another stampede come out or to see those species' evolved forms, but something else entered the clearing instead. A sharp cry entered the air. It was a panicked, exhausted BBBBBBIII that grew by the second. Out of nowhere, a small, green Pokémon fell from the canopy, and it just barely managed to catch itself in the air to keep flying straight through. The foliage rustled behind it, and a Houndoom lunged out with flames licking its snout. A flamethrower tried to incinerate that green Pokémon, but its form flickered, and it jumped several feet ahead to just barely avoid that move. Then, a Scyther leaped from the trees, scythe swinging down in an attempt to pin that flying Pokémon to the forest floor. In that case, the unknown Pokémon fell to the side to just barely dodge the move. None of the three Pokémon reacted to or even noticed the group hiding there. What stood out to Sam the most about the exchange was that he had never seen that first species before, not even in the new Pokédex. Just as quickly as they had appeared, the three Pokémon disappeared from the clearing. Their chase brought them back into the forest, and Sam could hear that strange Pokémon's cries become fainter as it continued to desperately fly away. That sound! He recognized its cry. Without a doubt in his mind, he knew it was the voice of the forest. But that wasn't a fight, Sam mumbled to himself. It was more like it was the target of a hunt. No one else spoke. Everyone needed to process what had happened. However, before anyone could say anything, Sammy suddenly pushed off that tree to run after the chase. Richard didn't hesitate to join him, and Sam could tell the two of them planned to stop that fight. After all, neither the Houndoom nor the Scyther seemed to be acting with benevolent intentions. But Sam? Sam didn't share those thoughts. He knew the green Pokémon was in danger, but he was unable to enter the same mindset. He had no doubts. That Pokémon had to have been the voice of the forest. In other words, it was both the solution to and the source of all of his problems. So, exchanging a look with Miss Drevis to warn her of his plans, Sam scrambled to his feet to take off running after everyone else. However, unlike the other two, he didn't have the same plan. Right now, the idea of help wasn't exactly at the forefront of his mind. Chapter 147. The chase exploded into the meadow, and the Oddish and Blossom there fled into the trees. Lunging ahead, the Scyther dragged a bladed arm through the air, and its Houndoom ally tried to snap out with a fire fang from behind. The Pokémon they chased dropped, barely managing to avoid both moves. The Scyther's wings almost allowed it to catch up, but only in a short burst. Its target flickered and was suddenly 5 feet ahead. "It's Celebi," Richard said. "What?" Sam joined Richard where he had paused at the edge of the meadow. Sammy was still running ahead. "That's Celebi," Richard repeated. "Trust me. I know for sure." Sam's grandpa Richard stared out over the battle, giving Sam a moment to observe the fight. It zigzagged through the flowers, the green Pokémon just barely avoiding every move. But it was exhausted, and its tiredness was only growing. Through the chaos, Sammy was trying to slip between the attackers in some harebrained plan to grab the tired Pokémon and run. Against those two, Sam could tell he wouldn't succeed. A Houndoom and Scyther would always outpace a human, especially across the uneven earth of the woods. "I never caught your name." "I'd ask for an introduction, but that doesn't matter right now," Richard said, and Sam felt his eye twitch. "The only thing that matters is stopping this. So I'm assuming your Miss Drevis is smart enough to follow a paraswag strategy that's paralysis and swagger," by the way. She doesn't know swagger, Sam said tersely. Does she know Confuse Ray? She does. Then use that. Before Sam could say or even do anything, Richard had already taken off, charging right toward where Sammy was struggling to enter the fight. Running ahead, he pulled out his Jolteon's Pokeball and twisted it to release his chosen team member. Fine. Whatever. Who cares what I think? It's not like I have a bunch of experience making plans. With Richard already running, Sam tried to explain a strategy to Misdreavus as fast as he could. If he's taking the lead, we're forced to follow, but we have our own goals too. No matter what, we need to catch up to that Pokémon. Celebi, or whatever it's called. But what matters is that it is the voice of the forest. Misdreavus's eyes widened when Sam said the Pokémon's name, but she still nodded in ready agreement. When he ran, she joined him, and he pulled off to the side to make more distance between him and the fight. Thunder Wave. Richard's Jolteon was like a bolt of lightning in both its movements and its use of the called-for move. Sam recognized its initial burst of speed as a use of quick attack, and that allowed it to slip right between the Scyther and Houndoom. The fight was then put on hold when Jolteon jumped and unleashed its electricity. In a burst, weak bolts of lightning jumped off its body to zap the two hunters. The Scyther and Houndoom shook, locking up due to the rampant electricity racing through them. Got you. Misdreavus was yet to catch up, but Sammy was right there. He managed to squeeze through and dive, just barely catching Celebi before it fell out of the air. Continuing with his momentum, he pulled it against his chest and began dashing out of the meadow. Keep going, Sammy! Richard shouted. We'll take care of these two. And we'll catch up later. Sam reached Richard's side, feeling his eye twitch once again. Are you kidding me? I need to reach it. Celebi was Sam's ticket to both go home and help Misdreavus. But if the Scyther and Houndoom needed to be defeated before he could reach Celebi, then so be it. Sam would do just that. Misdreavus, this is your first real battle, but I trust you, he shouted as she narrowed the distance. Use Confuse Ray. Trap both of them with your illusions. First battle, hey! Richard mumbled under his breath. Misdreavus tore through the air to get closer. Both the Scyther and Houndoom shakily pushed through their paralysis to face the newest threat, but all that did was give her the perfect opportunity to strike the Scyther between its eyes. Though successful, Confuse Ray could only hit one Pokémon at once. The Houndoom went unaffected and faced her, sucking in a breath for a flamethrower. Haunt, a voice whispered on the wind. Unfortunately for it, red eyes opened up in Sam's shadow, disrupting the flamethrower. Only the Houndoom and Sam were aware of Haunter's use of spite. That short delay gave Misdreavus just enough time to use Confuse Ray again, and both Pokémon became subjected to the move. Trapped by both illusions and paralysis, they weren't in a position to defend against any attacks. Richard wore a grin of utter confidence on his face. Ha! Alright, newbie, you did a great job. Paralysis and confusion both give a Pokémon half odds to use an attack, so these two will only be able to move 25% of the time. But that's not how it works. Sam said to no one, apparently. Richard wasn't listening. There were no set proportions for success. Some Pokémon were better at pushing through paralysis and confusion than others. But the combination was effective. Paralysis already made movement difficult with the electricity coursing through a Pokémon's body, and the illusions layered over their vision with Confuse Ray meant neither the Scyther nor the Houndoom knew where to aim the few attacks they could manage. Thunderbolt! Into double kick! Richard ordered, and then he sent Sam a glance. Give your Misdreavus a command, too. This is a double battle. But you can trust us to win. Alright, Sam said, his expression flat. Sam went on to watch the Jolteon burst with electricity, and it sent a bolt right through the Scyther. Immediately after, it turned around to slam its hind legs into the Houndoom's side. Strength-wise, Jolteon wouldn't be out of place on a 5-star team. But Haunter is at 8. We could probably defeat Richard pretty easily. Sam chose to say nothing along those lines, simply choosing to give Misdreavus an order, as requested. Nightshade. With Jolteon having dealt super effective damage to both Pokémon, the Scyther and Houndoom were still recoiling from the pain. Paralyzed and confused, they were too slow and too lost in illusions to know how to react. So, without difficulty, Misdreavus placed herself perfectly between them. Upon doing so, she pulsed out a nightshade. The caustic haze that formed around her ate into both of her opponents. That was the last little bit needed to send both the Scyther and Houndoom falling to the ground. Impressed. Richard proudly swiped a thumb under his nose. Jolteon set them up perfectly for you. You can trust us, just keep close, and we'll make sure you'll stay safe. Okay. Sam's gaze flicked to the woods to search for any sign of where Celebi had disappeared. As he did, Misdreavus floated up to him with a smile. You did a good job, he said, pausing briefly to give Misdreavus her well-deserved praise. She gained a slight blush, and then Sam no longer needed to search. From a tap on his foot, he found that Haunter knew where to go. While there was no longer any hostile intent, he could still track down where the Celebi had gone by following its pain. Let's go, Sam said, taking off in a dash. Richard blinked, then hurried to follow. His Jolteon ran over, he returned it, and Misdreavus followed along by Sam's side. She needs better moves, but as she is now. About 3 stars. Definitely. Haunter tapped on Sam's shin to provide the directions. Sam could tell that Celebi wasn't far off, but this was enough of a lull to finally give them the chance to talk. So what's going on? What was that Pokémon, a Celebi? That's the voice of the forest? Then why was it being attacked? And why was a poacher out here? Sam asked as they ran. I don't, it's just man, you have a lot of questions, hey. Despite having barely started running, Richard already looked as though he was already almost out of breath. Those were a poacher's Pokémon. Yeah, Celebi's a legendary Pokémon. I thought. He took a deep breath in and finally managed to find a pace that allowed him to breathe. Celebi. The voice of the forest. A legendary Pokémon native to Ilex, Richard said. We were warned about it when we first entered these woods, and with how it was being chased, that Scyther and Houndoom have to belong to a poacher. He then sent Sam a quick look, glancing at him out of disbelief. Although, I don't get it. Are you really sure you haven't seen? Sam shook his head when he could tell Richard wasn't going to say anything useful anymore. Yeah, no. I don't believe you. There's no way Celebi is a legendary Pokémon, Sam said. Legendary Pokémon are supposed to be these big, massive creatures. Where's its presence? Where's its power? If just those two were forcing it to run away, it can't be much. And if it's really a Pokémon, then why haven't I seen it in the new Pokédex? The new Pokédex had always had information missing. It only really included information about locations along the main routes. But when it came to known species, it generally had everything. Sam had no clue how something like a Celebi could be missing. He ignored the strange looks Richard continued to send his way, and he hardly bothered to listen to Richard's mutters that Celebi was a mythical Pokémon and not technically a legendary. Instead, now that the thought had settled in, he was too busy trying to understand how no legendary Pokémon had been listed. Of course, no publicly accessible Pokédex ever included details on legendary Pokémon, but Sam would have thought the new Pokédex was different. However, most legendary Pokémon were just that, legendary. They only existed in rumors and myths, and even the ones confirmed to exist, like Latios and Latias or Moltres and the like, were practically impossible to find. Trust me. It is a Celebi. And a Celebi is definitely a legendary, a mythical Pokémon. Richard shouted. It's a grass psychic type. Equal in every stat. Found in the Ilex forest. And it doesn't need to exert any dumb pressure if it can travel through time. Travel through time. Sam repeated. That was the only thing he needed to hear. Any remaining doubt he had was eliminated. He knew that Celebi was the voice of the forest. Not only was its cry too familiar, but when it had flickered forward to dodge the Houndoom and Scyther's attack, it hadn't used a Pokémon move. It moved more as though it had fast-forwarded its path, reappearing as if shunting itself through time. Thanks to Haunter, they were able to quickly catch up to Sam's ticket home in almost no time at all. Weaving through the woods, Sam found himself coming to a stop just past a few trees that surrounded a grove with a stone shrine. Ahead, that other boy, Sammy, pressed himself against the stone structure. He was still clutching the voice of the forest against his chest, but he was no longer alone. Let it go, kid, a voice said. My Pokémon will be back anytime. Don't matter what they do. Your friends won't be able to withstand their attacks. A rough-looking man in a leather jacket sent him a slimy grin from atop a purring motorcycle. He turned its handle, and its engine revved as if in threat. It coughed up black smog behind him. Sam held out a hand to try to signal for Richard to stay back. From where they had arrived in the trees, the man had yet to notice them. They were in the perfect position to creep around in the shadows and strike in an ambush. But it turned out that Richard was dumb. Really, really dumb. Don't give up, Sammy. We're here to help. Richard's shout was like a slap to Sam's face. Hey, you. Poacher. You aren't taking them. We'll never give up a Pokémon in need to someone like you. Genuinely stunned, likely for multiple reasons, the man glanced over his shoulder to see Richard confidently stride forward. He seemed too struck by disbelief to do anything to stop him, even as Richard boldly walked over to interpose himself between the poacher and Celebi. Recognizing any element of surprise had been lost, Sam unhappily trudged along to join Richard's side. Hey? You kids beat my Pokémon, the poacher asked, lifting an eye patch to rub his eyes. Well, it don't matter. Just means you're giving me more Pokémon to take. Richard replied with a smirk, causing the poacher to laugh. Oh, kid, the poacher said. You really don't know how any of this works. If you think those two were my only Pokémon, then you're going to be SOR. He stopped himself when the engine of his motorcycle suddenly stalled. In this case, it wasn't Richard's doing. He looked just as surprised as the man. Ahead of him, the poacher scrambled to get off his bike, just barely jumping off his seat in time. The back wheel of his vehicle sank into the earth, and then a mass of thin ivy wrapped around the motorcycle's sides, gumming up its parts. What? With the crunching of metal, the motorcycle was consumed and became nothing more than a plant-covered lump on the ground. Richard stared. The poacher blinked. Behind everyone, Celebi stirred. From within Sammy's arms, the supposed mythical Pokémon had turned to look out ever so slightly. Its single visible eye exposed a hateful glare, and it held out an arm toward the poacher. The ivy writhed under its control. You'll pay for this, the poacher yelled. He charged, but neither Richard nor Sam moved. The poacher might have been running right toward them, but Celebi was still active. Dropping its arms, the small Pokémon brought its head back. Using what little energy it had left, it cried out, and a psychic-type wave pulsed out to bounce the poacher back. Stop! Sam shouted. He realized what Celebi was doing too late. Heedless of his shout, the legendary Pokémon continued its cry, the familiar noise echoing throughout the forest. Sam tried to run closer to reach it, but then, as if in reaction, everyone close to it disappeared. And with that, Sam found himself flung through time for the second time this week. You've got to be kidding me, Sam groaned. His fingers wrapped around a tuft of grass. He was on his back once more. As much as he wanted to shout, he knew that wouldn't help. Miss Drevis came over to offer herself as a handhold to help him pull himself up, and Sam could still feel the chill of Haunter in his shadow. This time, he wasn't alone. They were still in that grove. That stone shrine was still present. Richard was here. Same as Sammy. But Celebi was gone, therefore, so was Sam's ticket back. We've been sent through time. Again. And just like before, Sam didn't know when he was. Nearby, Richard pushed up to rub his head. Sammy didn't move and remained where he laid on the ground. That thing was the voice of the forest, Sam mumbled to himself. Celebi is the one responsible for all of this. It's the reason why I was separated from my team. He needed to find it, and he needed to get its help. It was the only thing capable of doing something to prevent the decades Miss Drevis would spend on her own. He looked up. Are you okay, Miss Drevis? Sam hurriedly asked, and he thankfully got a reply in the form of a merry nod. Good. I'm glad. And what about you? I'm fine, thanks for asking, Richard grumbled. Sam was actually trying to ask Haunter, who recognized the question and sent him a comforting push to the bottom of his feet. So when are we? Sam asked, looking around. Even further back than before. I don't know, Richard said, letting out a sigh. All I know is that Celebi can bring people through time, but finding out when is. His voice trailed off as his eyes locked onto something, and Sam followed his gaze. There was a lump. But it was one they had just seen. Yet this was a lump that had changed and grown over the course of years. Where there had once been thin ivy, there were now thick roots. They grew out of the earth, making what they covered seem like a plant-covered boulder. But that wasn't what it was. No, trapped beneath all of that overgrowth was a hunk of metal that had once rumbled and purred. The poacher's heavy motorcycle was now brown, covered in rust, and parts of it had fallen inwards from an excessive amount of decay. Years, Sam said slowly. His heart raced in his chest. There's no way it could have gotten that old so quickly, so that might mean everyone else could still be nearby. Quickly, he searched his surroundings to try to find anything he could recognize, but he saw nothing familiar save for the trees of his immediate surroundings. He wanted to take off running, but that wouldn't help him return to his camp. All that he knew was that he was somewhere and somewhen in the ilex forest, but he didn't have the exact date, and Haunter had led him down a rather meandering path. Wait! Richard's eyes widened. Sammy! He scrambled over the ground to reach his friend. Sammy was yet to get up, and a prod into his side only resulted in the slightest of groans. Despite Richard's nudges, Sammy did not stir. As far as Sam could tell, whatever Celebi had done had hit him hard. It didn't seem like he had been able to resist as much as Richard or Sam. Is he? Richard gained a dark look on his face. Sam suddenly found himself wondering if this was why his grandfather had never mentioned a Sammy before. Not sure what else to do, Sam tried to take a step forward. It was then that a voice called out, and he heard the echoing sound of an electric shock. Out of nowhere, Misdreavus slammed herself into his chest, and Haunter grabbed his ankles to yank him back. Their combined efforts hurt, but they also saved Sam. Instead of hitting him, the electric-type move uselessly hit the ground right where he planned to walk. Get away from them, a boy's voice yelled out. Frustrated, Sam could only scowl. Things like this just keep happening. Why? Why can't anything ever be easy for once? Turning away from where he was technically looming over Richard and Sammy, Sam and Misdreavus glared at their would-be attackers as a pair ran out from the woods. Thankfully, the two newcomers seemed to follow the same decision-making process or lack of one as Richard from before, as neither the cap-wearing boy nor the Pikachu beside him bothered to reposition themselves for a better ambush. You, the boy shouted, his voice dripping with hostility. I should have known, get away from them. I won't let you hurt them. Am I supposed to know you? Sam asked, crossing his arms. You forgot. The boy clenched his fists. I can't believe it. Fine. Remember the name. I'm Ash Ketchum. From Pallet Town. The boy brought up a fist, raising it in threat. At his side, his Pikachu called out in support, letting loose a strong Pika-Pie, as its red cheeks sparked with electricity. Misdreavus, Sam said, eyeing their opponents and finding them lacking. Good news. This will be easy. These two don't even know what they're getting into. She cackled, and even if the pair before them turned out to be too tough, Sam wasn't worried. He could always just tell Haunter to circle around. So he stood off, facing this Ash Ketchum and that irritating-looking Pikachu. Sam just wanted to get this over with, and he readied himself as Ash threw out an arm to give a command. Instead, a loud thunk echoed through the forest. The boy fell to the ground, groaning in pain, and a fist pulled itself back from the top of his head. Seriously, Ash? Running ahead like that? Did you even stop to think, oh, who am I kidding? You never think. Behind Ash, a red-headed girl sighed and withdrew her fist. She crossed her arms, leering at the Ash kid. Ash sat up and clutched his shoes, leaning back to look at his apparent friend. Ah, come on, Misty. You heard that shout. That guy was trying to hurt them. Look. He even sent out his. Wait, what's that Pokémon again? Sam didn't bother to hide his distaste when the boy pulled out an electronic Pokédex. To make matters worse, Ash didn't even read Misdreavus's entry. No, the device read the page out loud for him. You have to be kidding me. What's society come to? Sam silently mourned for bookstores everywhere. The girl, Misty, just looked passively annoyed at Ash's behavior. However, the second she laid her eyes on Sam, she went utterly still. Frozen in shock, her eyes flicked between him and Misdreavus, and she barely managed to suppress a shudder. Right as Ash's Pokédex finished speaking, she grabbed his arm to yank him up and dragged him behind a nearby tree. Sam could hear the faint sounds of furious whispering. Ash's Pikachu sent him one last dirty look before scurrying off to join its trainer and friend. You know, I came to this forest to train with my team. Alone. Without disturbances, Sam grumbled quietly to Misdreavus. It was supposed to just be me and them. Together. By ourselves. Training for a few weeks without anyone bothering us and without anything else happening. As he finished, Miss Drevis made a soft noise next to him, and the heat in Sam's chest vanished. No, no. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I'm really glad I met you, too. She smiled. Sam looked over to check on Sammy and Richard only to find a third unknown person suddenly there, because why wouldn't there be another person? This stranger at least seemed more mature than the others, as he was on his knees and checking over Sammy, who was still unconscious. But next to them, Richard was staring. Ever since Ash appeared, he had never once torn his gaze away from Sam. Who are you? Richard asked. I'm Sam, Sam said. It's as simple as that. That's my name. I'm Samuel. He couldn't bring himself to say his last name. Thankfully, the awkward moment only lasted a handful of seconds before it was interrupted by a nearby shout. What? Ash's voice pierced through the silence of the forest. But he's quiet. Then, another smack echoed out. Rubbing his arm, Ash came back out from behind that tree. He sent Sam a final annoyed look, but he then dropped his gaze to the ground. Sorry, Ash mumbled. Thought you were someone else. At this point, Sam just wanted to go to bed. Specifically, he wanted to go to bed like he usually did, surrounded by his team. Okay. The guy in the back finally spoke up. The good news is he's fine, but the bad news is that he's exhausted enough to not wake up for a while. He looked around. By the way, I'm Brock. Sorry for not introducing myself sooner. I've studied a bit of medicine. Your friend should be fine, but we should bring him back to Arbaville. Since Sammy was Richard's friend, Sam looked to him to say anything, but Richard still didn't speak. I guess we're fine with that, Sam said, not bothering to keep the displeasure out of his voice. But I need one question answered first. What year is it? The year. Ash blinked. It's 2 years later. It's been 2 years since we first stepped into the forest. Sam really wasn't happy with Celebi right now. Because the date Ash had given meant too much time had passed. Sam had no hope that his team would still be nearby. Chapter 148. To Sam's surprise, it wasn't Brock who carried Sammy back. Out of everyone, Ash was the one to pick up the boy, bring his arms and legs up to wear him like a backpack, and then carry him the whole way to Arbaville. Everyone else had already seen this town once before, but this was Sam's first visit here. Arbaville wasn't the usual village he expected. It had its small houses and other buildings, but the place was not built on the forest floor. Instead, the people here had made use of the ilex forest's large trees for the base structures of their homes. Buildings had been assembled between large branches, and the trunks supported the cores of their homes. The ground itself was clear of any construction, left bare and open so that any wild Pokémon could safely pass by. This place wasn't located too far from the road that passed through that fallen tree, but it was just far enough that the trip back was awkward. Ash was fine, mostly, but he'd send Sam an occasional half-hearted glare when he thought he wasn't looking. Misty could not stop frowning, Sammy was unconscious, and Richard never spoke. For Richard especially, over the course of the entire trip back, it was like the world didn't exist for him. He would acknowledge the occasional warning to avoid a potential tripping hazard, but he otherwise spent his time deep in thought. Sam was very thankful Brock was around. Brock stayed on alert and kept a watchful eye on the forest around them, unaware of Haunter keeping guard in the shadows. He might not have noticed their stalker, but he was trying to stay on task. He truly seemed like the most normal person here. But, of course, that thought was quickly proven wrong. Diana, my beautiful Diana. Oh, come on. We need your help. Brock shouted up to one of Arbaville's tree houses. We require your wonderful assistance, we have an unconscious person down here. From atop a wooden balcony, a pair of faces peeked out to check on their small group. Sam immediately recognized one of them as Diana, the young woman who had first warned him of the voice of the forest, and next to her was an older woman who carried such a strong resemblance that she had to be Diana's grandmother. Right away, Diana dashed over to her home's rope ladder, which she jumped down more than she descended. The old woman, meanwhile, rushed back into their house to grab their stored medical supplies. Diana helped them bring Sammy inside. Once everyone was up, she laid Sammy on their main room's couch, giving her and Brock the chance to look him over. The old woman stepped into the room carrying a basket of medicines, but the moment she laid her eyes on Richard and the unconscious boy, she went through an almost imperceptible stumble, but she didn't trip and pushed through to bring the supplies over. Since Sammy was unconscious due to exhaustion more than anything else, there wasn't much Brock and Diana could do other than give him another once-over. The air in the room was tense, with Ash uncomfortable in the back and Richard having collapsed into a cushioned chair to watch the scene in silence. It felt oppressive. "I'll be outside if anyone needs me," Sam said, but no one paid him any mind. He stepped back out to that balcony without being bothered, and he leaned against its railing while Miss Drevis moved up to float by his side. "This sucks," Sam said as he dropped his head onto his arms. "There's just too much going on." "How much did you catch, Miss Drevis?" "I blacked out when everything with Celebi happened, but you?" She shook her head. She'd seen nothing. She had briefly fallen unconscious, too. "We've been thrown through time," Sam said, sighing. "That's it. That's the explanation. And I've been thrown through time again. My team. I'm sorry. I'm not from your time period, Miss Drevis. I'm from the future, or at least, I guess I'm this present future's past." He brought his head back to stare into the branches of the canopy. Out here, the leaves were thin enough to let through plenty of light. The gleam was enough that he couldn't quite make out the sky, but he could at least tell there wasn't even a single cloud. He had to wonder where his team was right now. Was he able to find his way back? Was there a version of himself out there somewhere, still traveling with all of his friends? Or had everyone been out here for 2 full years, just waiting for the day he'd return? But that wasn't something he could fix in this immediate moment. No, his comments had been the first time he had truly mentioned time travel to Miss Drevis, even as brief as they were. Despite the news being suddenly dropped on her, she went quiet for only a second. She faced Sam and puffed up with a smile to express her confidence. She didn't even need to think. Miss Drevis was already promising that she'd help. Her complete faith in him only made him feel worse. "Woo!" Diana's voice came from the entrance of her home as she stepped out to join Sam. "Brock does good work, but the moment things lighten up. I don't have anything against the guy, but man, can he make things awkward." She swiped her hands together as if cleaning them off after a long day's hard work. She walked over to the railing as well, leaning her back on it while facing in. "How are you holding up?" Diana said, speaking to Sam at her side. "I haven't seen you for, 2 years. You remember me?" Sam asked in surprise as he looked up. "Sure," she said. "How many people do you think come out here?" "A decent amount. This group is a little unusually sized, but we don't get too many people. Definitely not anyone who smiles when I warn them about the voice of the forest." She chuckled to herself, but Sam's eyes flicked to the forest floor. There were a few bridges between the buildings here to allow people to move between the trees, but down there, on the earth itself, there was nothing. He could even see where a few sections of tall grass rustled to mark wild Pokémon moving around within. He grimaced before he next spoke. "The last time I saw you was less than a week ago," Sam said quietly. Diana opened her mouth as if to respond, but she closed it to take a moment to think. The voice of the forest. Her realization was quiet and in wonder. "Its real name is Celebi," Sam grumbled. "It's a legendary Pokémon, apparently." It took Diana only a moment to truly understand the implications, but instead of doing anything to maybe comfort Sam, all she did was laugh. "So then you never completed your crazy little training trip?" I could have sworn she stopped herself. "You didn't take my warning seriously." Sam joined her in her backwards lean against the railing. He didn't stare inside, however. He didn't want to. He couldn't quite call himself a fan of everything that was going on. "I did take it seriously. I didn't go toward any voice that cried out, but it wasn't like there was ever one to lure me close. No. An archway appeared next to my campsite, and when I approached it he had to briefly stop himself to prevent his voice from cracking. My Pokémon pushed me in." Diana shifted around awkwardly. She couldn't look at Sam. "So, Celebi, hey? I didn't know the voice of the forest was a Pokémon. We always just thought it was a spirit, but then again, no one ever really encountered it. Most we ever hear are rumors of someone falling victim to its effects." "Then what was the point of the bread?" Sam stared until she let out an amused snort. "The bread? Oh, the berry loaf. It's a tradition that started way back when, even before my grandmother was born. If I remember the story right, she tapped her chin. A man visited Arbaville, and he was given bread as part of the usual hospitality. When he continued into the forest, he came out years later, saying the bread was the only thing that kept him alive. I don't think it keeps the voice of the forest at bay, Sam grumbled. I think he just ate it after getting lost. That was what Sam had done, after all. Sure, but you can't deny its effects. Traditions exist for a reason. I bet it helped you, right? She grinned at him even through his grumbles. Diana didn't talk much after that, choosing to just quietly lean back and use this peaceful moment to relax. That left Sam alone with his thoughts, and he couldn't stop thinking about the implications of Celebi and all of its powers. Time travel was confusing. It was simply too much. But then again, is Celebi why I have the new Pokédex? Did it bring someone from the future back to the past? So then, if my grandfather is here, he must have met someone. The new Pokédex is old. Are we about to meet some random professor from the future? I kind of doubt that. Unless I was the one to give it to him, but even that doesn't make sense. I don't have the new Pokédex on me, and I do not have all that information memorized. No one can memorize that. The level of detail is too extreme. His only other thought was that it was maybe connected to Sammy since the boy enjoyed sketching Pokémon. His influence would help explain all the drawings in the new Pokédex, but that still didn't feel right. But as Sam fell into his thoughts, a few shouts came from inside. Sammy seemed to have woken up, and he lashed out about no longer having Celebi in his arms. That was when Sam heard his grandfather step in, and with Richard's presence, the other boy calmed down. Whatever altercation that had been about to happen between him and Ash was stopped by the sudden, familiar face. After that, the conversation quieted to the point that Sam could no longer hear what was happening, and Diana used the moment to head back inside. Before you go. Sam pushed off the railing to face her. Have you? Did you see a team of ghost types nearby? Or maybe just a rare species or two? Anything like a Typhlosion, a Nilope, or a Trevenant? Anything at all? Typhlosion? A Nilope? She blinked at him. I don't think I've heard of anything like that recently. A Trevenant, though? Maybe? But I don't think any have wandered in from the deep woods for at least the past decade. Okay. Thanks anyway. Sam fell back down. Diana tried her best to send Sam a reassuring smile, but she had to step back inside to help out with whatever was going on. Sam was left alone on the balcony with just him and Mischievous. And Haunter in his shadow, of course. I don't know what to do. Sam turned to collapse onto the railing and stared out into the forest once more. My team is out there, somewhere, or maybe even somewhen. I need to find them, but Celebi ga. At this point, we're years apart. He didn't know if they were still in the woods. He didn't know if he'd been missing for all this time or if a future version of himself had managed to return to the past. He considered leaving Arbaville to head somewhere more connected, but would finding out more right now just mess with his future? Would that somehow set in stone a reality in which they'd truly spent a full 2 years apart? In more ways than one, Sam hated this. But through everything, he could still trace the source of his problems as well as his only viable solution. Celebi. I can spend all this time sitting around and worrying, or I can actually do something, Sam said as he pushed back up. Sammy's awake. I'm just wasting our time out here. More than anything else, if we want to fix this, we need to find Celebi. We need to find Celebi and make it help us. At his side, Mischievous bobbed in the air to show her eager support. Having solidly decided on his next steps, Sam marched back into Diana's home, standing in the door frame to look around at everyone here. He somehow managed to time his reappearance with a lull in the conversation. The old woman from before was now kneeling in front of Sammy, and the boy was now sitting up and staring at a much older version of his sketchbook that he held in his hands. I've come to a decision, Sam announced, and his words drew the attention of everyone in the room. We can't waste any more time. We need to take action, be decisive. So I've made a decision, I am going to hunt down Celebi, myself. In the back, Richard frowned. I'll be leaving as soon as I can, Sam continued. Mischievous and I are going to find it. If anyone else wants to join, I'll come. On the couch, Sammy looked up. Celebi is still out there. I remember it flying away. Except, it barely managed to do even that. It was hurt. So if we're going to find it, then Celebi needs our help. He stood, still clutching his sketchbook in his hands. And that action garnered another shout. If there's a Pokémon in need, then we have to help it. Ash yelled. His Pikachu shouted its name in agreement. I'll come, too, Misty said. And I'll help. Brock added. Then, turning to the only person who was yet to speak, Sammy looked Richard in the eye. Celebi was being hunted by a poacher when we first saw it, he said. Each word he spoke was slow and felt as though it had been carefully selected. That poacher would have seen us vanish. And that was years ago. If he was hunting Celebi, he would know about its powers, and who knows how much he's spread that knowledge around. So what? Ash glared at Richard. If anyone gets in our way, we'll just beat them in a fight. But Richard just sighed. I'm trying to say that we should be wary of people expecting us. So we'll have to be careful. There's no telling who or what will be waiting for us to make an appearance. But we'll win, Sammy interrupted. We'll win like we always do. The boy smiled at Richard, and Richard breathed out. Sam could tell he was unconvinced by Sammy's words, but he'd also already made his decision. He would be joining the hunt. With that, everyone had agreed to help Sam, the difference in objectives aside. Looking toward Sam, Sammy grinned and asked him a question. When are we leaving? Sam wasn't going to pass up a chance to be dramatic. We're leaving now. The full party was Sam, Ash, Misty, Brock, Richard, Sammy, and all of their Pokémon. Diana and her grandmother stayed behind for now. This group was practically a full-fledged expedition. Some researchers delved into ruins and explored the wilderness with less support than this. Sam took to the front, and no one questioned his decision to lead the way. However, it wasn't exactly him who guided everyone through the woods. Haunter was a far better lead, but he kept to the shadows and sent Sam silent signals for where to go. He was able to use the forest's plentiful shade to zip around, and he did his best to search for hints of anything related to Celebi's pain. As for the Pokémon that were out, Misdreavus kept to Sam's side, and Pikachu sat on Ash's shoulder. Though she hadn't bothered to release any other team members, Misty carried an unfamiliar Pokémon that looked like a spotted egg. Thankfully, no one seemed to notice Haunter's presence, but once in a while, Brock would send a glance to the woods. He was sharp, acting as if he had detected some trace of something nearby, but he never once pointed Haunter out. We already checked that stone shrine, and Celebi wasn't there, Sam said as the group hiked through the woods. That's where it started, and it's injured. It might be a legendary Pokémon, but bringing 3 people. It's a mythical, Richard interrupted. Sam ignored him. But bringing 3 people would have seen it expend a lot of energy, he finished. With it being so injured, I doubt it managed to go through another jump, which means it can't have got far. Also. At the back of the group, Sammy spoke up. When it happened, I was awake. After the jump, I mean. Celebi pushed out of my arms and flew off, but I didn't get to see where it went since I passed out and only woke up in Tao's home. So we're on the right track. Sam nodded to thank him. Tao was the name of Diana's grandmother. If Sammy had seen Celebi fly off, then Sam knew it had to be nearby, given it would require rest to recover. Haunter continued to lead their party, and Sam continued to follow Haunter. After all of his experience searching for Pokémon, the hunt ended up being surprisingly fast. Sam shouldn't have been surprised when Haunter found their target in almost no time at all. Not too far away from that stone shrine, Haunter escorted their group to the nearest, largest source of pain. No wild Pokémon bothered them along the way, and they arrived where 2 of the Ilex forest's massive trees had fallen to the ground. Right where one trunk had landed on the other, the impact had formed a dent in the bark that'd serve as the perfect hole for a den. Seeing that hole didn't confirm Celebi's presence, but the group of grass and bug-type Pokémon, all species that normally wouldn't tolerate one another, watching that den in worry certainly did. Only a legendary Pokémon could cause them to act like that. Sam was ready to finally confront Celebi and get what he needed, but when he took a single step forward, all of the Pokémon in front of that hole turned around, saw him, and then went still out of utter fright. He had to go still, himself, after seeing their reaction. I don't look that scary, do I? He asked, asking around. Have you ever looked in a mirror? Misty mumbled under her breath. Sam frowned, and though he finally wanted to face Celebi, it was Sammy who ended up stepping forward. No, the other boy said. I'll go. If you try to approach it now. I don't think it'd work. Thanks, Sam said flatly. Sorry. You just look mean. I'm not mean. The boy awkwardly shuffled in place, and Sam didn't know how to respond to that, but it did give Sammy the chance to move ahead. With Sam staying behind, the other boy grabbed onto a vine hanging off the bark to begin to climb, and then with a shout, Ash ran up to join him as he climbed the tree's fallen trunk. Misty mumbled something about how Ash resembled a monkey when he climbed. The two boys reached the top at the same time, leaving Sam and everyone else on the forest floor below. The various bug and grass-type Pokémon moved back to allow those two to approach the den, and Sam could already hear the pair of boys whispering among themselves about how best to approach Celebi. Which meant that legendary Pokémon was in that den. You're Sam, right? Richard suddenly said. Sam blinked in surprise. This was the first thing Richard had said since that speech back in Diana's home. You, don't think this is suspicious? Like we're finding Celebi way too easy. Why would it be suspicious? If anything, it's expected. I'm used to searching for Pokémon. I've done it plenty of times before. Richard repeated Sam's words under his breath, but he shook his head to move past the thought. That's not what I meant. I'm talking about the forest. You really don't think it was too easy? How no Pokémon bothered us even though there's a legendary Pokémon ahead? So, Richard continued. Pokémon can sense things like that. There are too few of them here. Given the crowd around where it's hiding, shouldn't at least one Pokémon have tried to defend it? Sam opened his mouth to try to reply, but he didn't have a counter-argument. Weirdly, Richard had a point. Right away, Sam began searching through the woods, scanning the trees to identify any looming threats. Above, on that tree, thin ivy whipped out to try to get Ash and Sammy to step back. Pikachu crackled with electricity, preparing an attack, but Sammy motioned for those two to stay back and then carefully crawled into the hole. Do you see anything? Sam asked on the forest floor below. Misdreavus was now staring out into the woods as well. Brock was doing his best to help. Meanwhile, Misty only continued to watch the exchange going on atop that massive, fallen log. Sam saw nothing, no matter how hard he searched. Finally, he heard the sound of Sammy pulling himself out. Climbing into the den had seen the vine attacks continue, but they were all incredibly weak. His touch had calmed down the hiding Pokémon, and, standing up, he carried that green legendary Pokémon in his arms. Celebi shook from its ongoing pain. There. Despite having already succeeded, Richard was not looking up. He was staring into a certain part of the distance forward, and Sam followed his gaze. What's that? Sam could see some kind of glow in the distance, with the light seemingly familiar and growing. He wasn't sure what to make of it at first, but it kind of reminded him of Ursaring's. Get down! He grabbed Richard to throw himself and the other boy to the ground, and Brock and Misty were thankfully off to the side enough to not be hit. A full-on laser pierced through the air, a hyper beam. As it blasted apart the bark of that massive fallen tree, the earth shook, and a large creature stormed out of the trees. Following it was a grinning man in a yellow mask that obscured the upper half of his face. He walked through the forest as if he owned it, and Sam did not fail to note the bright red R on the chest of the man's jacket. Ha! I knew you kids would lead me right to it. I'll be taking that Celebi now. Richard has been right since the start. I never noticed anything, but he somehow knew someone would be waiting for us. Except, how did Haunter not detect him? Whoever this was should have been sensed, especially with the massive Pokémon standing next to him. Towering over their group was a spiked body covered in stone plates, a pseudo-legendary Pokémon. Tyranitar. That was already terrifying enough, but this one had a strange tint to its stone body, and there was a rage in its eyes that saw it snap its stone-crushing jaws into the air. It looked half-crazed. Give it up, kiddos, the man said. No use fighting. I've already won. He doesn't know I have Haunter, but... The Tyranitar didn't scare Sam. What scared Sam was how the man had completely avoided all of Haunter's detection. I know you, Richard said, slowly picking himself off the ground to return to his feet. You're the Iron-Masked Marauder. A poacher for Team Rocket. The so-called Iron-Masked Marauder replied with a grin, and he confidently stood with his arms crossed behind his mad Pokémon. Got it right in one, kid. For that, I'll let you go. Well, I'll let you go as long as you hand over all your Pokémon, first. His expression was far too smug. Brock and Misty glared at the man out of defiance, and at the top of the log, Ash helped Sammy stand back up. That hyper beam hadn't hit anyone, but it had shaken the fallen tree and caused all of the wild Pokémon to scatter. It was a miracle that the two boys hadn't been knocked off themselves. "Hold on," Sam said, standing up as well. Wait. Before we do this, there's something I have to know." Sam had faced Team Rocket before. He had encountered plenty of ghost types. He had even fought through a horde of wild Pokémon. And he and his team had handled real ghosts before. That Tyranitar might have been terrifying, but the man behind it was just a man. Sam had seen worse, and if he really had to, he could just take on a more reedy-like demeanor to make sure he could properly pull off this plan. "I get following us. I get knowing about Celebi and wanting to capture it. And, you know what? I get working for Team Rocket. Clearly, you're an awful person that doesn't have an ounce of empathy to him," Sam said. Even through his mask, a vein throbbed on the man's head. Sam recognized he might have been channeling Reedy a little too much. But he kept going, anyway. "Except, there's one big part of this that I really don't understand," Sam continued. "Out of everything. Your name? You chose the Iron-Masked Marauder. Really? That's what you're called? You're supposed to be some terrifying, dangerous criminal, but you don't even realize how stupid. Hyper Beam. Now, Misdreavus." His delay had been just long enough. Misdreavus managed to position herself to land a confused ray right between the Tyranitar's eyes. Because of that, Sam barely avoided the second attack fired at him, and the bark of the tree behind him exploded once more. Ash and Sammy used this opportunity to slide down the other side of the fallen trunk to make their escape, and Brock and Misty dashed off to make sure they had room to carry Celebi away. Sam stayed behind, and Richard stayed next to him. The horribly named poacher faced the two of them, glaring at them with a scowl. Though the Tyranitar was trapped by Misdreavus's illusions, it was not lashing out, even with its strange rage from before. The poacher himself retrieved 2 darkened Pokeballs. This was a fight he was prepared to escalate, but even at a disadvantage, both Sam and Richard were prepared to hold him off to ensure everyone else could escape. Chapter 149. The situation was simple. Ash and Sammy were running away. Brock and Misty were heading off to help. Richard, a younger version of Sam's grandfather, stood beside Sam. And ahead of them, a previously unknown poacher, supposedly dubbed the Iron-Masked Marauder, held 2 dark-colored Pokeballs while his enraged Tyranitar growled at its surroundings while trapped in confusion. Next to Sam, Misdreavus floated forward, eyes narrowing as they flicked around to search for an opportunity to force the Marauder away. Richard pulled out his Jolteon's Pokeball and held it out. These two would essentially be their team, but Sam was also aware of his trump card, Haunter. No one else knew that the much stronger ghost type was nearby, giving Sam a bit of leeway to pull off something. That is, if he could think of a plan. "Our target is fleeing," the Iron-Masked Marauder said as he threw forward those 2 dark Pokeballs. "Go after them. Bring Celebi back here." The Pokeballs opened up to release a pair of Pokémon with a flash of purple light. To the side, a red-shelled Scizor snapped its claws, and a Sneasel dug its feet into the ground to get ready to rush off. Both Pokémon seemed to carry a strange tint to them, just like the Tyranitars, but mainly, Sam noticed the look in their eyes. They were shadowed, as if they'd been unable to sleep for a week straight, but mainly, they looked utterly consumed by rage. The worst part of the situation was just how casually the Iron-Masked Marauder seemed to be treating this. Sam couldn't see the man's eyes due to the red lenses built into his mask, but his tone of voice was both lazy and confident. It hit Sam then just how the Marauder managed to slip past Haunter's senses. As a ghost type, Haunter was best at detecting the negative feelings and malicious intentions that would prime an area to spawn ghost types, but the Marauder had such confidence in him that he didn't feel any of that. This was just a job, and Sam and Richard were both just minor obstacles to remove. "We can't let him get to everyone else." Sam needed to be the one to reach Celebi first. Mean look. Misdreavus could only target one Pokémon, so the Scizor managed to hop over that fallen tree and escape. Still, a single Scizor would be much less of a threat than a Scizor and something else. But calling for that move meant he would need to handle the Sneasel. The Tyranitar was still there, too. "Ha! Funny trick, kid. But you don't even realize how my Pokémon work, do you?" The Marauder's smug grin mocks Sam. "These are dark balls. Dark Pokeballs. An invention based on a design that literally washed ashore one day. See, they can catch any Pokémon, previously caught or not. And catching a Pokémon in them brings them to their max level, all while making them evil, too. The man's explanation made Misdreavus hesitate, but Sam just continued to glare. So you're calling your Pokémon evil, Sam said flatly. You know that means you're calling yourself evil too, right? That's what society calls me. Why not make it my brand? The man then cackled, and Sam had to resist rolling his eyes. Pokémon weren't evil. Whatever those balls had done had simply made them enraged, and Sam could recognize that thanks to all of his experience with Annihilape and the ghost type. Looking them over, the effects reminded him of something like Curse, the non-ghost type version, that is. Basically, an effect that saw a Pokémon's power pushed to its limits, but in this case, without the speed reduction it'd normally bring. Despite the man's Pokémon looking so enraged, they weren't attacking. Whatever the balls had done, the Pokémon were waiting for further commands. That, and both were trapped in one way or another. The Tyranitar couldn't see what was going on around it due to its confusion, and the Sneasel couldn't exactly run off toward Celebi with Misdreavus's mean look keeping it here. The Marauder looked entertained enough to want Sam and Richard to make the first move. Sam could tell the man thought he had the upper hand. But Sam wasn't too worried. Again, no one else realized that Haunter was here. Sam, Richard suddenly said, grabbing the knob of his old-fashioned Pokeball. Just so you know, the guy's bluffing. There's no such thing as max level. Sam felt an eye twitch at the obvious advice. Out of everything I've learned, that was one of the first facts I picked up in this world, Richard continued. Levels. Moves known. Speed restrictions. A Pokémon is only as strong as its trainer. But this guy? I bet he thinks that power is the only thing that matters. That's because it is, the iron-masked Marauder said, exposing a set of far too white teeth. Here, let me demonstrate that for you Tyranitar, use Hyper Beam. Sneasel, use Slash. Don't let these two catch up with their friends. He was not just targeting Sam and Richard's Pokémon. Sneasel's feet blurred for a quick attack that launched it forward, and a glow appeared in the back of Tyranitar's throat. Richard shouted for an agility the second his Jolteon appeared, and Sam called for his own set of orders, but he made sure to phrase them in a way that they'd apply to both members of his team. Confuse Ray. Maintain it. That was one good thing about specializing in a type. While shouting for shared moves, people wouldn't immediately know just how many Pokémon had been commanded. The Marauder's Sneasel was fast, but so was Misdreavus unfortunately, not at the speed she needed. Her Confuse Ray left her eyes in an attempt to strike the Sneasel, but all her opponent had to do was jump to the side to avoid its effects. Thankfully, everyone was too distracted to notice Haunter. He pushed his ghost type to the fullest, lingering in the shadows, and his eyes flashed. The Tyranitar's confusion was maintained, which would minimize its influence in this fight. However, with Misdreavus's Confuse Ray failing, the Sneasel was free to act, and that gave it free rein to meet Richard's Jolteon head-on. Richard quickly shouted out a set of commands, relying on the obvious to try to win the fight. Double kick! Double kick! Double kick! Richard yelled. Double kick wasn't a bad choice. Sneasel, a dark and ice type, was especially vulnerable to fighting type moves. A solid double kick could immediately knock it out, and Sam had already determined Richard to be about a 5-star trainer. But that meant Richard had plenty of room to grow, and Sam could only watch in horror as the Jolteon turned around to smash its opponents with its hind legs. In other words, it looked away. That wouldn't have been a problem against most Pokémon since Jolteon was too fast to need to worry about a retaliation. This Sneasel, however, was under the effects of that dark ball. It was berserk and pushed to its limits. It was fast enough that reacting was trivial. Without any hesitation, it dipped to the side and lashed out with a claw. Jolteon was almost immediately caught in the side and was sent flying. Its double kick never made contact, and Sam could tell from the nature of the move that Sneasel's slash had landed critically. Jolteon! Richard said, staring. When his Pokémon landed, Jolteon exhaled in pain. It was already too injured to stand back up. With one Pokémon already defeated, the enraged Sneasel turned its gaze to Misdreavus. In the back, the Tyranitar unleashed its Hyper Beam, but its confusion meant the move went wide and shot through the canopy. The earth shook when a massive branch hit the forest floor. Ha! I told you kids you were underestimating me. Misdreavus was doing her best to stay brave, but Jolteon was stronger than her, and that Sneasel had won in an instant. Right away, Sam knew Misdreavus wouldn't win. She didn't have the battle experience, and she didn't have the strength to push past a super effective type. But she was still a ghost type, and that opened up options. Sam took in everything he could see and tried to come up with something. He knew he needed a plan, one that he needed to create in an instant, and he thought he'd be struggling for a while. But then the solution suddenly clicked. Leering at the Tyranitar, Sam realized that if Misdreavus didn't have the power to attack, then they could rely on something else that did. At Sam's side, Richard shakily returned his fainted Pokémon, and that flash marked the start of the exchange. Misdreavus. Nightshade to hide yourself. Focus on dodging. And Sam turned to the Tyranitar. Hey, you big dumb lizard. Still confused? You're so pathetic that you won't ever be able to land your moves. Richard's jaw dropped. Sam was outright inviting a pseudo-legendary to attack. Misdreavus was only so skilled as she was now. Her confuse ray was limited to sight and not sound. However, what Richard failed to realize was a detail Sam had noticed. The Tyranitar wasn't currently capable of much creative thought. It was still following the first order it had been given, and it was only attacking with Hyper Beam. In other words, it was relying on a normal type move. And Sam trained ghost types, which meant Misdreavus would be immune. As fast as he could, Sam turned toward Richard, and he spoke quickly. Run! And then he ran off himself, charging right to where Misdreavus was actively fighting. With Sam's shout of Nightshade, darkness filled the space around her. The Sneasel's next swipe went wide, but it left a groove in the Nightshade due to the dark-type energy contained within. Since everyone was distracted, Haunter jumped from shadow to shadow across the ground, and Misdreavus's opponent lunged toward her to disappear into her sphere of shadows. Hesitating, Richard didn't immediately flee, and Sam skidded to a halt to interpose the Nightshade between him and the Tyranitar. Run! Sam shouted again. Finally, Richard seemed to process Sam's shout, and he dashed off into the woods. Meanwhile, with Haunter backing away, the Tyranitar managed to break out of its confusion, and that same glow grew in its throat. As the only thing it could see was Misdreavus's Nightshade, it opened its mouth to aim at the sole viable target. Misdreavus and Sneasel fought as silhouettes inside, and the Tyranitar wasn't of mind to care about how its ally would be in its beam's path. Wait! Stop! Don't, you idiot! Unfortunately for them, the iron-masked marauder's shout only came out after the hyper beam had left his Tyranitar's throat. Too late! Cold hands wrapped around Sam's shoulders, and he whispered a final command to Misdreavus. Escape! Haunter pulled him away just in time for the hyper beam to overtake the Nightshade. Sneasel took the full blast of the attack, and Misdreavus disappeared within. Sam then ran, chasing after Richard while the iron-masked marauder was too busy yelling insults at his Pokémon for them to give chase. Tyranitar might have been strong, but it was slow. The speediest of the marauder's Pokémon were now either fainted or preoccupied. He couldn't exactly send his Scizor after Sam if it was already chasing after Ash and the others on its own. Thus, Sam and Richard were able to fully escape the site of the battle. With the distance between him and the marauder constantly increasing, Sam searched for where Misdreavus had gone. She should have been immune to that hyper beam, and his heart briefly skipped a beat when he saw she wasn't there. But after a few seconds, a giggle left a nearby shadow, and Misdreavus left the darkness to appear with a smirk. Good, Sam said in relief. You figured out Shadow Sneak. That's how you managed to get away. Misdreavus replied with a wide, proud grin, celebrating her clever and continuing application of the ghost type. Their entire group continued to run, and the iron-masked marauder didn't have any Pokémon he could use to stop them. Sam was able to safely guide Richard away, using the shadows of the trees to obscure their escape. Over time, their mad dash forward transitioned into a slower jog, and Haunter subtly moved ahead to guide Sam in the front. With this escape, the situation had changed. Sam and Richard had managed to delay the iron-masked marauder just long enough to give everyone the chance to run away. But there was a downside to this. They had no idea where Ash and everyone else had gone, and they were far enough away that Haunter wasn't sure how to track them. In other words, Sam and Richard were now on their own, separated from everyone else. Sam knew they could handle it, but it was frustrating to have been so close to Celebi only for it to practically disappear less than a few minutes later. Still, he would have the chance to find it again now that they'd left the iron-masked marauder behind. However, with Jolteon's injuries, they would need to find a spot to rest and recover, first. Quite literally, they weren't out of the woods just yet. Chapter 150. Sure, Sam and Richard might have been the only people nearby in the woods, but Richard didn't seem willing to talk. The silence was awkward to the point that Sam felt as though he could cut it with a knife. He wasn't sure what was going through Richard's head. The other boy clutched his fainted Jolteon's Pokeball and kept sending Sam strange, confused looks. Sam resisted speaking up for any small talk, however. A small voice constantly whispered its warnings in the back of his head. If he's my grandfather, doesn't that mean if I say the wrong thing, I'll prevent my own birth? At least Sam didn't need to think too much, given the need to follow Haunter. He just kept moving, eyes forward, pretending to search for a route ahead but really just searching for the signs left by his Pokémon. In the silence, Haunter brought them through the woods. While he was unable to find Ash or anyone else, he was at least able to guide them toward what he felt to be a place of safety. Slowly, the trees grew denser around them. Slowly, a strange mist built. It soon became as if the world was shrouded in an omnipresent fog, but Haunter didn't slow in any way to denote his concern. With how much of that mist blocked his vision, Sam was only barely able to follow his Pokémon, but he kept at it, and Richard kept close. The trees of the forest rapidly became nothing more than looming silhouettes, and the fog was a blanket that completely covered them. But counter to how it all appeared, they were suddenly outside of it. The fog vanished in an instant, and they stood just past a final line of trees. An impossibly clear lake stretched out before them. The day had gone on for just long enough that the sun had moved far across the sky. However, it wasn't quite sunset. Rays of light bounced across the lake's surface to make the water gleam. Close to the shore, soft waves lapped at a small ledge where the grass suddenly cut off. Sam almost thought that this lake was sealed by a layer of crystal. But looking closer, he quickly realized that wasn't it. It was simply that the lake's surface was genuinely that clear. I can count the stones on the bottom. Towards its center, where the gleam of the sun blocked his vision, Sam could see the occasional shadow of a swimming water type. No river or stream flowed into this lake. It might have been completely isolated, but it wasn't stagnant. There was something about it that made Haunter confident they'd remain safe as long as they stayed here. They could rest. And, with Haunter's feeling subtly expressed to Sam from the shadows, the decision to stay came easily. "We'll camp here for now," Sam said, breaking everyone out of that enthralling sight. "We don't know where anyone else is, so it doesn't make sense to keep pushing through the night and risk getting ambushed while we're effectively blind." Richard nodded slowly. "All right. Then, give me a minute. I need to treat Jolteon." He briefly flicked his eyes over to Sam, his gaze lingering on him, but Richard just shook his head and moved over to sit behind one of the forest's large trees. Sam could hear the sound of a Pokeball going off to release the Pokémon inside it, but Richard seemed to want privacy to treat his injured team member. Sam wasn't going to fight against the other boy's desire to be alone for a bit, but it wasn't like he had any supplies on him to make camp right now. Strapped for options, he sat at the water's edge. The sounds of the lake's slow waves helped him finally calm down, and he watched the faint movements of wild water Pokémon from the lake's shore. After everything else, this place felt like a blessing. It was hard to think about just how compacted everything had been recently. Sure, he had spent a few days traveling with Misdreavus through the forest, but then he met his grandfather. Got thrown through time. Fought a poacher. Saw a legendary Pokémon. All of that in a single day. Right now, Sam was just happy to have this chance to relax. Leaning back, he closed his eyes to focus on the feeling of the breeze and the grass beneath him. When he opened them back up, Misdreavus was floating at his side, and she moved down to lean against him comfortably. "When I was with my team," Sam started quietly, "the reason we came out here was for training. Both for them and for myself." Misdreavus looked up. "A problem I kept having was that I over-relied on pre-made plans. I wanted to train myself to fight more instinctually. Like all the best trainers tend to do. And back there, despite everything," Sam gained a slight smile. "We actually did it. You were incredible. I came up with a plan on the spot, you understood me, and all of us. We managed to pull it off." He subtly patted the ground next to him, sending quiet thanks to his shadow. Though Haunter stayed hidden within, Sam could feel him wiggle with barely restrained pride. "We've come a long way," Sam continued, speaking softly. "You especially, Misdreavus. I think, if my team was here, they'd be proud of what you'd achieved. This would be a celebration." Even though Celebi and that poacher are still out there. In just a week, you were able to hone and improve your moves, and then in your second real battle ever, you managed to pull off something like that. Miss Drevis squirmed with a furious blush on her face, unable to withstand Sam's compliments any longer. He laughed, willing to stop to save her the embarrassment, but he meant every word he'd said. For now, he pushed back up and continued to stare out over the water. He didn't have anything else to say. He just wanted to enjoy this moment of peace and quiet. It lasted for a while, with just him, Miss Drevis, and Haunter resting on that shore. Then, Sam heard the sounds of footsteps over the grass. Richard spoke up behind him. "Who are you?" Sam looked over his shoulder to see the other boy standing a foot away. Richard stared at him with a gritted jaw and clenched hands. Behind him, his Jolteon approached the lake. It now had a medicated bandage wrapped around where the Sneasel had landed its swipe, and it curled into a ball for a long rest next to the peaceful waves of the lake. "I'm Sam," Sam answered. His statement was met with the twitch of an eye. "That's not Ugh. Who are you? Not your name. Not your identity. I mean, who are you in relation to everyone else?" Richard took a step forward and pointed a finger toward Sam. "Tell me. They knew you. How did they know you? And just how did you get here? And how were you able to fight so well if your Miss Drevis is as weak as that?" Miss Drevis sent the other boy a sharp glare, and though Richard went quiet, he still stuck out his chin in defiance. Sam briefly felt the need to stand up and defend his friend, but what was the point? Both of them knew Richard was wrong. Miss Drevis wasn't weak. Raising his voice would just drop him to Richard's level, and it wasn't worth getting himself caught up in an argument like that. "She's not weak," Sam said, his voice calm as he turned back to the water. "She just doesn't have that much battle experience. I think it says a lot about you if you didn't notice that. You should know she's been training all this time." Sam heard a bit of stammering as Richard tried to object, but the other boy stopped himself, biting his tongue. Silence then persisted. Sam could practically feel Richard's expectant gaze. Eventually, he didn't have a choice. Sam let out a long sigh and continued to speak. "Miss Drevis is Miss Drevis," he said reluctantly. "And me? I don't know what you're asking. I'm just Sam. That's who I am. What else do you want me to say? How did they know you?" Richard repeated, speaking through his gritted teeth. "Not sure," Sam answered honestly. "Maybe it's because I'm not from this time." He sent another glance over his shoulder, and he realized that Richard's face was bright red. It was hard to see this boy as his grandfather. He had none of that calm wisdom Sam had grown so used to while growing up. "Sorry. I'm not trying to be vague on purpose," Sam mumbled. "I guess I should have been more specific. I'm not from this time, but I'm not from your time, either. I'm from 2 years ago. As in 2 years ago from right now." Miss Drevis intently listened in. "So I'm not from your time period," Sam admitted reluctantly. "I don't really know what happened. I was with my team, I was pushed, and then I fell, and then everything happened to have me encounter Miss Drevis, and then I met you. I know you think there might be something else going on, but there's not." "Really?" Sam said. "All of this has been an accident, a cruel accident. So, when you asked me who I am, I really meant my answer. I'm not anyone special. I'm a ghost specialist. Really, I'm Sam. Your grandson." But he could never say that part out loud. A long moment passed in which Richard just stared. His gaze burned into Sam as if he was trying to sear away any potential lies. However, he eventually seemed to reach his limit, but instead of yelling, he just collapsed onto the ground. "So after all of that, you're really not?" "Ugh." Richard scratched at his head. "So they haven't actually met you?" "Not yet, I mean. I guess." Sam replied with a casual shrug. "I don't actually know what's going on. I'm mostly just here due to coincidence, I think." That was a half-lie. Sam knew he was here due to Miss Magius, as she clearly remembered and ensured all of this would happen. Meeting his grandfather had not been intentional on his part, but it was also too much of a coincidence for it to be an accident. Too much was going on for all of this to have happened on chance alone. It felt as though it had all been planned out, as if dancing to the beat of something planned out for him. He hated that. "But I also have a question for you." Sam turned to look at Richard, and the young version of his grandfather stared up at him from the forest floor. "There's one thing that's been sticking with me. Do you remember what happened when that poacher first appeared?" "Yes," Richard answered cautiously. "You mean the marauder, right? When everything happened about an hour ago." "Yeah," Sam said, letting out a sigh. "When he showed up, you said his name was the Iron-Masked Marauder. But how did you know that? He's from the future, and you're from the past." Silence. Richard was stock still as a tense moment came and passed. The other boy opened and closed his mouth as if to try to come up with an excuse, but he ended up letting out a groan, and he brought up an arm to cover his eyes and mouth. "I'm not from here, either," Richard said, his voice practically a groan. "I'm from somewhere else. I woke up in Celadon. Over in Kanto. I didn't know anything before that. I just knew." He stopped himself. "Something would happen here," Richard said. "In Ilex. I made sure to keep traveling with Sammy because I wanted to find Celebi, too." Sam didn't let anything show, but he felt as though his entire body had just been cast in lead. "What? My grandfather isn't. He wasn't originally from the past?" He knew that meant something, but he wasn't sure what he'd need to ask. There was more that his grandfather was not telling him, but his heart was pounding far too hard in his chest. Sam was only able to speak a single question. It ended up as one word. "Why? Why I wanted to meet Celebi. It's obvious. Because everything about my time period sucks." Much to Sam's surprise, Richard's voice twisted into genuine rage, and he suddenly slammed his arm onto the earth. Shocked out of his stupor, Sam watched him. For a different reason now, Richard gritted his teeth. "I know I can never go home, and I know I never want to go home, but it's just I thought I could at least jump ahead to the future and I thought I could at least have a chance." Richard wiped his eyes. "Pokeballs suck. They work, but using a knob is clunky. Pokémon centers aren't that common, and treatment can take days if things get bad. There are barely any proper amenities, but I can at least live with that since I'm mostly spending my time traveling. But I think, more than anything else, I hate the current gym challenge. I want to meet and face people who build each other up. I don't want to encounter people who are more preoccupied with proving themselves to be better than everyone else instead of working to improve society." Sam blinked as Richard breathed in a choking gasp. It took a few seconds for him to settle down. "That Cold War you mentioned," Sam said in a quiet voice. "Everything you mentioned. It's all due to that standoff between Kanto and Johto, isn't it?" "Yeah." Richard managed to sit back up, and he pulled his legs into his chest. "It was a pain to cross over to Johto from Kanto, but I just wanted to leave, and Sammy really wanted to explore a new place. I figured that if all of this was going to happen anyway, I might as well turn it to my advantage. So when he talked about visiting the Ilex forest, I remembered Celebi existed and agreed." Not once did Richard say how he knew this, even though Sam desperately wanted to know. But Sam couldn't bring himself to ask. He was more focused on making sure his own feelings didn't show. I get it," Sam ended up saying. "I didn't exactly come here willingly. I just want to return to my team. And for Miss Drevis. More than anything else, I want to make sure she's happy no matter what." Miss Drevis had been watching this conversation as if it'd been nothing more than a daytime drama. When Sam spoke her name, she blinked in surprise, and then she sent him an embarrassed smile. He did his best to smile back. Then, Richard hesitated. It took him a few seconds to finish his thought. "I guess you should probably know that I know what happens next." A pause. "What do you mean?" Sam felt as though he'd been punched. Once again, Richard didn't speak immediately. He looked over Sam with a furrowed brow. It was as if the boy thought Sam was still a threat, even after everything they'd just discussed. But the need to say something, anything, won out in the end. Sam couldn't even think of how long the other boy had kept this secret close to his chest. Richard probably desperately wanted to speak about this with someone, and who else but another person thrown through time. "You weren't here originally," Richard admitted. "And I wasn't either. The first time around, the intended time around, it was just Sammy and Ash. But there, Sammy went by Sam, and in what I learned, they did their best to rescue Celebi together. Except, it didn't work. The Iron-Masked Marauder." Richard trailed off. His next words were more akin to a cough. He caught it. Caught what? Celebi. Sam froze. How? He hissed. He used his dark balls, came Richard's answer. The same ones he bragged about earlier. He caught Celebi, forced it to make some kind of plant-like kaiju, and then once they stopped that monster. Celebi, it. Richard's expression was blank. Celebi died. Sam was silent. Misdreavus looked horrified. For a second, it was like the entire forest had to breathe in. Without speaking, Richard robotically stared out over the lake. Sam carefully joined him. But that was only how it originally was, Sam said. We're here now. We are, Richard whispered, and I don't think that was supposed to happen. Probably not. Sam took a moment to gather his thoughts. In other words, this is an opportunity, he said. This might be a chance. We can step in, stop Celebi's capture, and then we can change the future. Together. If Celebi was meant to die, then Sam would stop it. Not because he wanted to help it, but because helping it would give him the chance to help Misdreavus. He wanted to wring its neck for causing all of this, for causing Misdreavus to spend so long on her own, but with Richard's knowledge, he had an advantage. This could be the in he needed. By saving it, he could trick Celebi into owing him a favor, and then he could use that favor to stop Misdreavus from spending decades on her own. Okay. Yet. This is perfect. Sam said. You already said it yourself, the real threat isn't the iron-masked marauder, but it's actually his dark balls. If we can just stop him from using those, then we can stop Celebi from being captured and making whatever a kaiju is. And if Celebi is never captured, then Celebi won't die, Richard realized. For some reason, his gaze flicked to the crystal-clear water of the lake. But you know he's still a threat, right? Even if we stop him from using his dark balls, he still has that Sneasel and that Caesar and that Richard hesitated. And that Tyranitar. Sam felt unconcerned. He had Haunter. Only he knew about his trump card. Doesn't matter. I have Misdreavus. And ghost types are tricky. We'll be able to pull something off. But he'll attack us. We outnumber him. He has a Tyranitar. We have us. But his Pokémon are frenzied. They're violent. They have maximized strength. Sam smiled. That means he'll be overconfident. We'll be able to predict how his Pokémon will fight. Richard was now standing, staring at Sam in disbelief. He opened his mouth while desperately trying to think of a counter, but nothing came out. Instead, he simply threw back his head for a single laugh and collapsed onto the ground once again. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, and he looked significantly more relaxed than he had a mere few seconds before. All right, fine. I guess you win this time, Richard said, calming down. Man. If you're this confident, then you really must be more experienced than me. Yup, but that's all thanks to my team and the Pokémon I've trained with, Sam said. But even then, we have other Pokémon. And time. And even more than that, with your knowledge, we actually have the chance to make a solid plan. Sam looked over to Richard, Misdreavus, and even the shadow beneath his feet. Jolteon had walked over, and it was now leaning against its trainer's side as it listened in. Also, there's something else, too, Sam added. What? Richard asked carefully. The iron-masked marauder doesn't know something obvious, Sam said as he leaned back. He'll be trying to trap us, but I specialize in the ghost type. And what most people fail to realize about the ghost type is that the ghost type can never be trapped. Since Sam didn't have anything on him, Richard was the one to prepare a meal for everyone, and Sam devoured the offered food. Later, when night fell, Richard loaned him a blanket, and Sam got the best sleep he'd had in nights. The area around the crystal-clear lake was peaceful and lacked aggressive Pokémon. Even with the lingering threat of the iron-masked marauder over their heads, Sam found that he was actually able to relax. He spent a while hashing out plans with Richard, but Sam mostly just sat next to Misdreavus. More than anything else, he wanted to help her. She was his primary motivation. He knew she deserved so much more than this. In the morning, Sam practically inhaled the dried fruits given to him by Richard, and the other boy made breakfast for his team. If any small pieces of food were snatched away by Haunter, no one noticed, and Sam certainly wasn't going to say anything. Their goal for today was to meet back up with everyone else, a task they expected to take an unknown amount of time. But, while loitering on that shore after cleaning up their breakfast, a flash of light caught Sam's eye, and he saw a brief glow appear on the other side of the lake. "Did you see that?" Sam said, pausing as he folded that previously borrowed blanket. "Hey! I did," Richard said. "It looked like light from an electric-type move." Both of them went utterly still, and then they exchanged a look. Wild electric types weren't really a thing in the Ilex forest, but there was one specific electric type that they knew would be nearby. Ash had a Pikachu. "Quick, have your Jolteon use an attack!" Sam shouted. "Give me a second. Hurry up. We have to make some light." As fast as he could, Richard called his Jolteon over, returning the few other members of his team. Then, almost immediately, he had his Pokémon send the bright flash of a thunderbolt up into the sky. He made sure to have his Jolteon not send the move that high up as they didn't want to alert the iron-masked marauder to their presence. Though the move didn't go past the top of the trees, it would certainly be visible from the other side of the lake. When the immediate glow of the thunderbolt's electricity faded, they waited. For a second, Sam thought nothing would happen, but then they got their response, another flash of lightning coming from the opposite shore. "They're there," Sam realized. "They're there," Richard repeated. Immediately, they exchanged a look, and then they hurried to gather everything they could. Even Misdreavus helped clean up their campsite. Richard shoved all of his belongings into his backpack, only putting the barest amount of effort into folding them up. Then, they took off running with Richard's Jolteon continuing to flash, and even more flashes came from the opposite shore in response, moving closer by the second. The lake wasn't too large, it was smaller than the one behind Blackthorn's gym, but it was large enough that they had a bit of a trip to meet halfway. The two sides approached each other in the opposite directions of a clock, and the group they were running toward really was the group they expected. At first, Sam could only hear the distant sound of buzzing electricity, but then he heard a familiar voice's shout. "Richard! Dick! Rich! Are you there? Sammy!" Richard shouted. "Sam! Samuel! We're right over here!" Bursting through the trees, both sides finally laid eyes on one another. Ahead of them, Sammy let out a laugh, and next to Sam, Richard looked as though he wanted to collapse out of relief. Ash slowed to a halt beneath the trees, a bright smile on his face, and Brock and Misty fought to catch up behind them. Those two were panting, having to push themselves to give chase so unexpectedly. "You're okay," Richard said, breathing out. "Of course we are." Was there any doubt? Richard met his friend in the center, embracing him in a hug, and they both laughed out of sheer relief for having successfully reunited after everything that had happened yesterday. But Sam's eyes were on something else. As Richard eagerly chatted with his friend, Sam found himself staring at the creature above them. It was small, only a bit bigger than Typhlosion's head, and its green, plant-like body almost reminded him of an unripe onion, that is, if an unripe onion had arms, legs, and a pair of insect-like wings on its back. The legendary Pokémon, Celebi, said its name, its voice a mixture of a buzz and a hum. It flitted downward to circle Richard and Sammy, curious about the newcomer talking to its friend. "That's the voice of the forest," Sam breathed, whispering to himself. The answer to and source of all of his problems was right there, perfectly healthy and hovering in place only so many feet away. "Oh, yeah. I can't believe I almost forgot." Sammy smacked his forehead. "Richard, this is Celebi. Celebi, this is Richard. And over there, we have Sam, who..." His voice trailed off. Celebi glanced over to Sam, and Sam could not look away from the legendary Pokémon. Its powers were what caused all of their troubles in the first place, but he also knew that it had the potential to fix everything in the way he sought. He took a step forward, remembering the promise he had made. He then took another step, thinking of everything Misdreavus would be forced to go through. Celebi was the one responsible for all of that, and that truth sat at the forefront of his mind as he approached. Sam took another step, and then another step, and another step after that. From under his feet, something tugged on the bottom of his pant leg, but Sam pushed on, unable to pay it any mind. Behind the group, Ash took on a dark expression, and his Pikachu's cheeks crackled with static. Sam ignored them, too. Right now, only Celebi mattered, and it just looked on curiously, unfamiliar with Sam. Still, it seemed to give him the benefit of the doubt. After all, he had shown up alongside the friend of a friend. Celebi controls time. We have time. It can help us right now. What's a single moment to it? All he needed it to do was a minuscule task. With just a modicum of its legendary power, Celebi could prevent Miss Drevis from suffering through years on her own. Everything could be fixed. He tried to get closer, but the tug on his pant leg became more and more fervent with every step. A nervous tension entered the air as everyone seemed to hold their breath. The distance between Sam and Celebi became negligible, but then Haunter finally had enough, grabbing Sam's heel with a yank. He tripped. "Are you kidding me, Sam?" Richard pinched the bridge of his nose, and Sam face planted into the cold, forest floor. Grumbling to himself, he would have liked to stand up, but Sam finally recognized that Haunter wasn't trying to make him stop. He'd been trying to get his attention. Now that he was on the ground, Sam could feel it. It was subtle, but every so often, the earth seemed to shake. "What is that?" Sam said, eyes widening as he felt the ground move under his palm. "What is what?" Sammy asked. Everyone started to look around. Snapped out of his initial mindset, Sam pushed up to his knees to place both of his hands onto the forest's soil. He could feel it shift around ever so slightly. Somewhere in the distance, heavy objects were irregularly hitting the earth. With the warning shared, people caught onto the noise of a faint rumbling quickly. Soon joining it was a distant cacophony of wood breaking and branches snapping following that up. Celebi, who had looked so friendly and curious before, suddenly gained a grief-stricken look on its face. Before anyone could share any comments, it took off, rushing toward wherever the source of that noise was. "Celebi! Wait!" Sammy chased after it, and Ash was quick to follow. Brock and Misty both sighed before running as well, and Sam finally stood to exchange a slight look with Richard. It was far sooner than expected, but they were both in agreement that this was probably it. Chasing after everyone else, Sam made sure to send Haunter a quiet thanks. The further he ran into the woods, the louder the noises became. This wasn't just a rumbling, it was the frequent feeling of an explosion followed by the shattering of wood. There was a piercing noise, a massive blast, the shouts of wild Pokémon, and then something heavy fell. Ahead, Sam could see a point in which the sun shone through the trees, and everyone stood frozen up ahead. He broke through the forest's edge and out of place forest's edge. It shouldn't have been here, yet, before him, he was faced with what seemed to be acres of brown dirt. Those massive, ancient trees of all types had fallen. The forest here was nothing more than logs and churned up earth. Around them, wild Pokémon fled in all directions, heedless of the group of motionless humans. Sam could see another flash in the distance, not the flash of an electric type, but the flash of an extremely powerful move. The clues were all there. It didn't take Sam long to put everything together. He was the one to vocalize what was going on. "That's Hyper Beam. It's the iron-masked marauder," Sam whispered in dawning horror. "Since he couldn't find us, he's destroying the forest. He's doing all of this just to lure Celebi out."